You're alive.
Welcome back, guys. My name is Hash. I'm joined by Card Gamer, and we are in our first broadcast of two this weekend. It's going to be really special. We have our first semi-final of the Aegis Draft League for this season. Card Gamer, I'm really excited for today. We have some really good lineups, some really good players. LOR is in its off season, and we still have this content because we're being saved by Aegis. So
Yeah. Usually really boring off season, but like you said, jam-packed this weekend. We have one semifinal today with Maokai Saplings and Trundle Trolls. We're about to jump into that and break everything down for you. And then tomorrow, we're coming back at you again with more content. We got Swings Flock and His Ears Ascended. So we're going to figure all that out this weekend, and then make sure to stick with us next week on a new patch when we do the finals.
yeah, absolutely. We've got two banger sets coming up this weekend and four amazing teams that have made it out of a really stacked Aegis season. I'll be honest, because the format was very different, as you guys probably already know. It was a draft league. Captains had to pick players based on a specific pool that they had to choose from, and basically all the players that ended up entering the league were insane. So we had 32 players to start with. The field's been cut in half. We have 16 left. Am I doing my math correctly? Yeah, I think I am. And yeah, we'll see how the sets go. So tonight we have, as Card Gamer said, Maokai Saplings going up against Trundle's Trolls. These are two teams that are very strong. Both me and Card Gamer have spoken about them privately, and we both think they're two of the best teams in the league. But that's obviously, like, all the teams are really good, so that doesn't really say much. What do you think about this set, Card Gamer?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really exciting set. Like you said, we have very high opinions of both of these teams. They have a bunch of really strong players. And then I think when you look at the lineup directions and the selections of decks that are kind of accumulated tonight, we're going to notice some interesting things. Just to give you guys a couple spoilers of some things that are going to head up, we won't break into it too much. There's only one Janna Nyla tonight. So, we still got 4 Jannas, don't get it twisted, but only one Janna Nyla. And then the other thing that's going on is we are maxing out on Teemo. There's like a lot of Teemo, which is kind of what you would expect, but like there's going to be more Teemo than you expect, and you'll kind of see what I mean in a little bit. There's definitely some really interesting trends with the lineups, and it'll be really interesting to see how these decisions pay off for both of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, we just had the World Qualifier last weekend, so it makes a lot of sense that there would be this like really big reaction to what happened in the World Qualifier, right? So we see these teams, you guys will see their lineups shortly. Also, another thing that you guys will notice is that both of these teams went really anti-meta with one of their players. Like, really aggressively anti-meta with one of their players. So, we'll get to that. But let's just say we all think Shadow Isles isn't in particularly great spot right now. But we do have, like, 3 Shadow Isles decks that we're going to potentially see today. So, stay tuned for that.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting. And as we go through the night, we can kind of share some tidbits about the meta, what the players are thinking, and kind of give you the full breakdown as far as, you know, what are these lineups doing and what are these collections of decks kind of doing together. Because you probably have seen all of these decks if you were paying attention to the World Qualifier last weekend, but the way Aegis asks you questions, especially in this Iron Man type of format, the way decks get paired together isn't in the same traditional way you would expect at a World Qualifier Open. And another thing you'll see because of that is, like, I don't think there's any Seraphine tonight, Hash. If I'm looking at these correctly.
There's none. After, like, I believe last week there was a 13 out of a potential 16 Seraphine decks. Maybe my numbers are a little off, but the point that I'm getting across here is that last week we had a lot of Seraphine in Aegis, and today we still have a couple of Seraphine this week, but it's not today. Today we have 0. Between the 6 lineups that we're gonna potentially see today, there is absolutely no Seraphine, and this is again part of their reaction to the World Qualifier, and mainly actually the rise of Galio, obviously, which we will be seeing today most likely.
Yeah, plenty of Galio today. I'd be very surprised if we don't run into one. And we were kind of talking a little bit about the meta, a little bit about Galio, a bit about Seraphine. I think it's a reasonable time to kind of bring up kind of the meta triangle that showed up really last week in the World Qualifier Open, especially in going into day 2. So I think people who were paying attention to the tournament, you'll see there was kind of 3 big pockets people fell into, which kind of make up the triangle we're in, which is the Janna Seraphine pocket. Generally, people went like the Janna Nyla direction. The other pocket that people went for was like the Demacia pocket, which had stuff like Scouts, Janna Teemo, Galio, like we were talking about. Also, Elusive saw a lot of play in there. And then there was like the final pocket, which is the anti-Demacia pocket, right? Which is your stuff like the SI decks, like we're talking about. Stuff like the Fizz-Yumi that we see on screen right now, the Jax Ornn, the Shen, a bunch of these style of decks.
Yeah, and we see our deck breakdown for this week. So keep in mind, this is from a sample of, I believe, hold on, let me do math again. 3, 3, 3, 3. 12 lineups. There were 12 lineups submitted between the 4 teams this week. So 12 times 3, that's 36 decks. Are my numbers wrong?
That sounds correct. It should be 36 decks making up this breakdown, and keep in mind that half of these decks are going to be here today, and we're going to see the other half of these decks tomorrow.
Yeah, so this is the deck breakdown for the entire week. Janna Nila being number 1 is probably not a surprise to many people because it is like the consensus best deck. Something that I will point out though is that keep an eye out on for the specific lists of Janna Nila that people bring this week, because they look pretty different from what we've been conditioned to seeing this season so far. Shen J4, probably the most popular anti-meta pick because it's a Demacia deck, so it maintains the tools that Demacia has, like Petricite Broadwing, while also being an amazing Demacia counter. Like playing Galio, playing Scouts, playing any mid-range deck really into Shen J4 is a nightmare. So it makes a lot of sense that Shen J4 has this popularity. And then we see also, as you said, Fizz-Yumi and Galio, as we mentioned, some Jax Ornn kind of resurfacing, right? Because there is an anti-Demacia pocket, and Jax Ornn is one of the few decks that can beat Galio while also having a good Janna Nila matchup. That's something that's very difficult to find in our current deck pool. So will be interesting to see how this week goes, because the deck breakdown is very different from last week.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention as well is there is a bit more Galio than shown here. There's a bunch of different ways to combo Galio, so expect a lot more Galio this week than just 2. But
yeah, I actually think there's more Galio than Janna Nila, I think, if I had to guess.
Yeah. But speaking of Galio, let's hop in to our first matchup. We have Ninja Duelist versus Methodical, and we got a bit of a Galio in this lineup, don't we have?
Yeah. We're going to get to the Galio. Let's first start off by talking about, as you said, there's a lot of Teemo this weekend, and this is the first Teemo we're seeing today. It's Teemo Janna. So we see Ninja Duelist electing to play Teemo Janna instead of Janna Nila as a Janna deck of choice. This is probably because, as you can see in the lineup, it's a triple Demacia lineup, so it's trying to be good into Janna Nila, and Janna Teemo is kind of a mirror breaker in the Janna Teemo Janna Nila matchup, because CS is such a strong finisher. Acorn and Teemo being elusives that just like constantly chip in for damage, as well as the augmented clock link applies a lot of like really difficult pressure and forces like really bad mana trades for Janna Nila. And also, one of the biggest traits all of these decks have into Janna Nila is that they make a development of Sunken Temple very difficult, because it's a 5-mana tempo loss, which is something you guys got to keep an eye out for, because the Janna Nila list may or may not have adapted to that. We'll see how later on today.
Yeah, it is something we'll definitely have to keep an eye out for. But moving on to the next deck, we have Scouts. You know, pretty much a classic list. You got your 3 Inspiring Light, your 3 CS, your 3 Form Up. You know, you're just running your nice suite of units to make sure you get on the board quickly. 3 Vanguard Sergeant, make sure we have those FDs. The one sort of interesting thing about this list in my mind is that we actually cut all of the Genevieve, which at first looks a little bit weird, but I think when you play a lot of Scouts this meta, and when you start to play a lot of these Demacia decks, you realize one of the really appealing things about the Demacia decks, especially the smaller ones, is just going wide quickly and playing these really powerful board buff spells. So cutting out the Genevieve and deciding to only run these 5-drops that have 2 bodies attached to them on the top end, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I also think that like if you're trying to beat Jananila, Genevieve isn't particularly like the best way to do it. Obviously, when you cut Genevieve, there is another problem you're introducing, which is you're relying on CS just a little bit too much than you would like to. But in this specific iteration of the deck, Ninja Duelist also opted to play 3 copies of Vanguard Sergeant as opposed to the I think more common 2-off. And that's very helpful in that regard as well, because it creates a little bit of redundancy. As for Demacia with the Scout keyword can have a similar impact to Champion Strand.
Mm-hmm. And moving on to the last deck, we have the Galio Garen. This was a deck that made a lot of waves last weekend in the Open. Some really strong showings, really popping up due to both its really good Scouts and Seraphine and John and Nyla matchup. So just being really strong into a lot of the top decks. And, we're just taking advantage of the Formidable keyword, getting on board really effectively, and taking advantage of some of the really powerful Freljord tricks, like Sky Splitter, like Elixir, like Omen Hawk. Just fairly honest Demacia mid-range at the end of the day, but it just gets on the board really effectively.
Yeah, me and Card Gamer have actually a nickname for this deck. We call it the Final Boss, and it is the Final Boss, because if you ever play a Petricide Charger into a PNZ deck, you will feel very, very powerful. I'm gonna tell you that.
Yeah, play Galio versus a PNZ player. It's actually the funniest thing you could ever do.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. As Card Gamer said, you just keep slamming units, and like they're all kind of overstated because Formidables just work that way. That's how they're designed. And with tricks like Sky Splitter, Elixir of Iron, which if you cope hard enough, that's 1 mana all out in Freljord deck. So like deck's really, really strong, and it also gets to use incredibly strong tools like the Darkened weapons, like Garen, and also obviously since it's a Demacia deck that tries to go wide, it plays Champion Strength, which is one of the most broken cards we've had since it's come out, right? So that's Ninja Duelist's lineup. It's mainly trying to beat Jananila, and pretty much nothing else like Seraphine, but there's not that much Seraphine this week. Let's move on to
extremely strong cards like Garen.
Yeah, Garen's really strong, dude. What? I thought that was like a commonly accepted opinion. Have you ever played this? Have you ever played Garen decks before? The Garen's actually like really strong.
Anyways, moving on to Jaxorn, it's pretty classic. You've all seen it. We're going with the one Scholarly Pioneer. I think it's a really strong inclusion, this meta, just because it holds equipments really well. The flexibility is really nice, especially if you're trying to beat like a John and Nyla for the Sunken Temple. Playing the Omen Hawk, this meta makes a lot of sense. I think the Omen Hawk and the Weaponsmith's Apprentice combo really gets this deck on the board in like a nice way, and like has a little bit of extra redundancy to hold weapons than it did before, which is really nice. The other thing you'll notice about this list is we're actually on a 1-1 split with Wild Claw's Ferocity and Buried in Ice, which is just kind of looking to be a little bit better into the mirrors. I've really liked Wild Claw's Ferocity a lot in this meta when you're trying to play Jaxorn a bit more aggressively into like the more common pillars, but recognizing that we're kind of looking to be a bit better into the mirrors and like the decks that these Freljord tricks are really good against, I really like Methonical's approach for Jaxorn.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Wild Claw's Ferocity is like one of the best cards into Nila, but also Buried in Ice against like a Demacia deck, which is something you're targeting when you bring Jaxorn, is just very powerful as well. Moving on, we have Fizz Yuumi, and this is like kind of an anti-meta deck, but not in the traditional sense, because it has like a very proactive game plan, and it's more of a combo deck, and it's honestly like I tried to play this like a little bit, and it's honestly like quite difficult and a lot harder than it meets the eye. Also, the lists surrounding this deck aren't very solved, so really interesting to see Methodical come up with this version with the, as you said, 2 Scholarly Pioneers. Also was in the Jaxorn, only 1 there, but 2 here, which makes a lot of sense because this is a lineup that's probably trying to play into Jananila. And also electing to not play like Bandle Commando or Saurian, which I've seen in some other lists. Not entirely sure if this is correct or if that version is correct, but regardless, what makes this deck really strong is Yuumi, right? Like we were talking about this earlier, Yuumi's really, really strong.
Yeah, and then going into the last deck, we have another Gamer, Galio pile. This time throwing in some Jarvans, help with the ratioing a little bit. All of these decks are going to look pretty standard. The main difference between this one and the other one, I think, outside of the Jarvan, is we're actually not running single combats, going a little bit leaner on the spells to have a bit more redundancy in the units, which I think makes a lot of sense in a deck like this, where you really just value being on the board efficiently. But now that we know the lineups, let's hop into the game. And Hash, who do you think's favored? How do you think the bans are going to go down here?
All right, so I think this is like a pretty even set, more or less. I think the bans, as far as that is concerned, it's a little more difficult to guess because, like, I'm not too familiar with the ban phase, or with the what's it called, the matchup tables of Fizumi. But what I can ask you, Card Gamer, is what is your prediction for the entire set overall between the two teams?
I think it's probably going to go in the favor of Maokai Saplings. It's pretty close at the end of the day, but I think I would give them the edge. I just think Janna Nyla is such an absurd deck, and like you can't really counter it. And I think the fact they have it is going to give them a big edge.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. I also think they have the better logo, so you know I've been voting for the better logo. So we keep going strong with Maokai Saplings. Hopefully we see them next week in the final. But also wouldn't be unhappy to see Trundle Strolls. They're also a very good team.
All right, moving into the ban phase, we see both of these decks here, and like you were saying, Hash, I think the ban phase is pretty interesting, right? Because we have this Fizz Yuumi deck, which tends to struggle a bit against the CS card. It does not like when these decks go wide and play these board buffs. It can struggle a lot with that pressure, and considering we have 3 of those, I'm curious how Methodical tries to find his out, because I imagine on Methodical side it's trying to figure out how to get this Fizz Yuumi through.
Yeah, I think the Garen Galio Jarvan ban makes a lot of sense from Ninja Duelist side. Interesting to see Methodical also up to bat Galio Garen. I do think it's probably correct because it just is like probably the most threatening deck for Jax Ornn. If I had to guess, Teemo Yuumi can be a little bit of an issue as well for Jax Ornn, but that matchup has been very, very even on stats this season, despite being a little more favored in the direction of Teemo Janna in the past. So I think based on like the raw numbers, the Galio ban from both sides makes a lot of sense. What I do notice though is that there's a bit of a queue order situation here, where like the person who's gonna be more favored to win the set is kind of reliant on what decks get queued up first by the 2 players.
I understand why you're saying that, but I actually think if you're in Ninja Duelist position, you should be feeling pretty alright. I think while these decks that your opponent has the ability to really get on board efficiently and present these threats you can't actually deal with that are just going to counterclock you, on one hand, I think on the other hand, these decks, they're not happy at all dealing with Fort Demacia and Champion Strength. If we can set up the boards and draw those cards and play those things on time, I think we're going to give Methodical a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I would be inclined to agree with the idea of like Ninja Duelist being slightly favored just because of the ability to beat Jax Ornn twice with these 2 Demacia decks, because CS is kind of difficult for Jax Ornn to deal with. I do think Methodical is really hoping to hit Fizz Yuumi into Janna Teemo. Fizz Yuumi into Scouts is not a great matchup, and you obviously, like, because of the way best of 3 works, you need to get a win with both of your decks that get left open. So with that being said, let's move on to our first game of the day. We've got Jax Ornn against Janna Teemo. Hard to say what the correct mulligans are because we don't know who has the token on one, but I think this Omen Hook is pretty much unconditionally a keep. Let's see, Card Gamer, what do you think of this matchup? How is this supposed to go? What is the game plan from both sides?
Yeah. So from my understanding, on the side of Methodical, you really need to be able to try and force your opponent to block down or deal with your pressure in some way to slow down their game plan. So you have the ability to either 1, kill them before the Champion Strength goes off, or 2, make them not be able to Champion Strength and kill you on like the 6 or 7 like they would usually want to, and be able to get an Ornn turn to really try and close the game. Where on the side of Ninja Duelist, I think you're just trying to make sure you can get your board, you have enough units to go around them with the CS, and then you can punch through with that CS before Ornn or Jax flips and takes over the game.
All right. Just with that being said, like you were talking about trying to delay the pressure that Timo Jana tries to apply for Jackson to be able to win the game beforehand. We saw Almond Hawk face an Acorn on one and stop that Acorn from swinging, which would have discounted champion strength, which is huge. That's like one of the things that makes this deck feel really unfair to play against sometimes, is when you get that CS discount. But Methodical opted to swing on turn 2 with the Almond Hawk, and Ninja Duelist played Form Up to protect the Acorn and now got the swing and the CS got discounted. So, not to say that swinging with Almond Hawk was incorrect. I probably wouldn't have done it. I'm not sure if it was incorrect. But what I am saying here is that the CS being discounted is going to probably play like a really massive role in this game.
Yeah, it's really interesting that Ninja Duelist actually elected to use the Form Up now instead of using the Broadwing to try and clear the Omen Hawk, valuing using the Miriam later for mana potentially to really get full value out of it. And I guess Methodical just saying like, yeah, sure, Form Up here. I'm fine with it. It's a really interesting decision from both players, and I'm really curious to see like the effects this will have later on, because one thing that players, I'm sure if you play this deck, have noticed, and you probably noticed playing against this deck, is the Miriam for spell mana can be so oppressive in setting up these really powerful CS turns later in the game, like 7, 8, 9.
Yeah, the oppressive is a very good way of putting it. It's just this kind of like interaction that you can't really like deal with. They're just gonna do it, and you're gonna either be able to answer the CS or not. But very often, because of how much mana Miriam cheats and how much advantage the Jana Timo deck accumulates, it becomes really hard. Speaking of the form up that got used by Ninja Duelist, we do see one thing here happening. Castaway was played, and we hit the Fearsome Weapon. And Jana decks typically have a very low access to Fearsome blockers, and we're seeing that in action right here. This Castaway is going to connect for 6 damage, which is obviously very good, but more importantly, there's a Wild Class Ferocity and there is an Ornn, and both of these units are going to be Fearsome if we play them, ideally. So that's going to be like really difficult for Ninja Duelist to deal with. Like, this is a very meaningful clock that Methodical is applying with his Jaxhorn deck right now.
Yeah, and Methodical tried to play respectful, tried to get on board in a way to actually withstand some of the pressure that Methodical could be pushing. But it puts Ninja Duelist in this really scary position where we're being forced to use this Miriam to draw to get on the board properly. We haven't gotten this Jana out of our hand. We're not setting up this Cloudwinder for turn 5. And we're still, our opponent, like you said, is advancing their game plan really effectively. They're pushing a lot of damage. And it's a really scary position to be in because on the side of Ninja Duelist, it's really hard to be alive past turn 8 right now. And it doesn't look like we have very high odds to kill before turn 8.
Yeah, it's genuinely looking like there might even be a potential lethal next turn, depending on how big the Alpha White Claw becomes. I can't really do the math off of the top of my head, but especially with the Intransig pulling like a very weak blocker, potentially. Obviously, if the Jana gets developed, the Jana will probably get challenged if there's no lethal attempt. But just as you said, Methodical isn't like taking the driver's seat here, has the tools that he needs to actually apply the meaningful amount of pressure to make CS like a pretty difficult card to play, even at 6 mana, because you don't end up having the board. And the Saurian is the ideal development at turn 5 as well. Like there's so much going in favor of Methodical right now.
The Saurian having the Omen Hawk buff too, just being extremely oppressive, just making it that much harder to Gale if we do manage to draw a Gale off of Jana, just making it that much more survivable in combat. And with the breakpoints being presented, this +1 damage is going to be quite meaningful, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if Methodical ups to go for the fish fight here, because like when you go for the fish fight here, it's obviously great because it gets sort of Jana, but at the same time you tap under Wild Claws Ferocity plus Intransig Lure next turn, which I think is a really, really meaningful power. And we see Methodical opting for doing that. I'm not sure if it's correct, but I am a fan of the play. It's probably what I would have done. We see the draws from Ninja Duelist. The draws from Ninja Duelist are incredible, by the way. Like, if Methodical... Hold on. Let's do the math real quick. So we have 9 mana this turn. We have Clocklink, Timo, CS. We have mana that's enough to play the 2 elusive units, and potentially another elusive unit if we find that off of Clocklink, and to play the CS. So if Methodical doesn't have lethal this turn, it's going to be really difficult, actually, given these draws off of Jana.
Yeah, this is a really insane draw. And like you were saying, the Clockling has the potential to give us a lot of cards that give a lot of value. I really like throwing up this John at a block, just making sure we don't die.
Alas, it's lethal.
But we are dead.
Yeah. But that was like a really like game that was going to be getting really close if there was no lethal there. It was actually going to be going the other way if there was no lethal there. But Methodical was able to find the lethal, and the Fearsome Weapon putting in a lot of work for that. If we saw the second form up, we would have been fine probably in the Ninja Duelist, but we didn't have it, and that was the problem in the end. Methodical starting the set very nicely for Trundle's Trolls. They go 1-0 up. Jaxorn has gotten the win. Now it's going to be about squeezing in that Fizz Yumi and seeing how that performs into the other two decks that Ninja Duelist still has to play.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. We see that game. The CS player just really getting punished for trying to kind of respect the other player's game plan, which sounds a little bit weird because, like, you do have to respect your opponent, right? But it's very important as the CS player to respect what your opponent can do while, like, very efficiently progressing your game plan. It seems like we slipped up on that a little bit, and I think if we can get back on track, we'll be in a really good position to be able to close out this set. But these are decks that apply a counterclock really efficiently, so if you ever step off the gas and give them time to, like, be the ones in the position trying to progress their game plan, the game gets very scary.
Yeah, definitely agreed with that assessment. Makes a lot of sense what you're saying. And now we just move on to this Scouts versus Fizz Yumi matchup. And this matchup is, as far as I am aware, decently in favor of Scouts on data. I would assume that's because of the amount of pressure that Scouts is able to apply by going wide, because Fizz Yumi is not a deck that's very good at going wide, and to combat that pressure, it's going to need to spend mana that is very meaningful, because it's a combo deck that relies on a lot of permanent buffs and a lot of, and like usually two swings with like a big elusive unit or like a big overwhelm unit. And the amount of mana investment that goes into that is just something that like is really hard to accommodate while also keeping up with pressure. So it kind of turns into this like somewhat of a race, but it's a race that Scouts wins more often than not.
Yeah. And I like the Bone Club from Methodical. I don't think you have a lot of other reasonable choices. And then, yeah, how do you feel about the swing from Ninja Duelist?
So we're saying that we have form up. Honestly, it's quite interesting, but I think Methodical is not allowed to block.
Yeah, I don't think Methodical is supposed to block, and I like the swing from Ninja Duelist. I think you are almost forced to do it here. Especially with the form up in your pocket, because you're just so low pressure in the beginning of the game.
Yeah, as mentioned previously, like this kind of turns into a race, and this is the best way to just apply pressure, because what this means is that like you either take the 4 damage or you block with your Fizz. I'll play form up, and then you're gonna have to redevelop another unit and then put a buff, more permanent buffs on it, which is just like a lot of tempo that Methodical has to sacrifice to progress his game plan, right?
Mm-hmm. And when you think about how the mana works out with like how important unit mana is to Ninja Duelist versus Methodical, you see how strong that trade is for Ninja Duelist. So really liking how both players played the first few turns, actually.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of how this game has gone so far. The swing from Methodical, not even wanting to like bother activating the elusive on Fizz, I'm also a pretty big fan of. Just understanding that like you don't have the luxury to just proactively play spells on this kind of matchup. You need to be using your mana to deal with pressure. And if this 7 damage is taken and this MF doesn't die, we are probably going to be able to push lethal on our next token if we don't die, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that should be the case. And then I really like this trade from Ninja Duelist, just kind of saying that the way I'm winning this game is through these board buffs. Saving this damage is super important because I don't have a blocking Badger Bear right now. I can't actually block a Fizz in the air. And I just want to be able to get wider than you and play these board buffs. So I'm really big fan of how both players have been playing out this game so far.
Oh, the Benefit Squire is like a very cute top deck because we can give Challenger to Sergeant and pull the Fizz if we want to, like potentially.
Yeah. Wondering if that's the play we go for. Unfortunately, we don't have enough buffs to beat a freeze, but I don't know if there is really a more effective way to spend our mana this turn, potentially depending on how we think about CS next turn on the side of Ninja Duelist, but a lot of really important questions to try and answer now that really depend somewhat on what you put your opponent's hand range on.
Yeah, this is also one of the things about Physiumi is that, like, or not just Physiumi, it's also like Feralior decks in general, where like they have the tools to stall out the game, but you can't really play around them in the short term because in the long term you often end up losing the race because they'll play it right before they kill you the turn after, for example. So like here, you just gotta probably like say, okay, they have freeze, they're probably gonna use it this turn, and I'm okay with that because then on my next token there is no freeze.
Yeah. Like you said, you have to kind of make the decision of when to pull out the cards because, you know, the cards aren't going to go away by themselves. So it'll be interesting to see how we try and poke the cards out of Methonical's hand. You know, if we go for an Inspiring Light and then swing, if we go for Inspiring Light and then maybe take a cheeky pass, try and burn some mana and lean into an FD. We actually do have quite a bit of options on the side of Ninja Duelist because under most assumptions, you're living 1 to 2 more attack tokens. So, like, saying we're dying on turn, like, 8 usually, sometimes 10. But having Caster Vision, this Fizz Rally can maybe do some shenanigans. So
yeah, this Fizz Rally might end up being the reason Methodical ends up being able to even beat a potential CS. We have to wait and see how the next couple of actions plan out. But Methodical does have a potential line into lethaling next turn. Obviously, Ninja Duelist understanding that this is how this matchup is supposed to go. I think what we're supposed to do here is try to apply meaningful pressure, but it is kind of difficult to do that because, yeah, this Fizz doesn't want to go away from the board. But at the same time, it's a good blocker here. Like, even if there is a form-up to deal with the Fizz, there's a freeze backing it up, right? So it's difficult to apply pressure because Fizz is actually acting as a blocker here.
Yeah, it's a very tricky spot. And like you were talking about with the freeze backup, what Methodical is able to do, if he holds up all of his cards, it isn't forced, is next turn he can go Three Sisters, Fury of the North Fizz, drag something, rally, and then, you know, just go for lethal on the next turn, on like the next action.
Isn't that deterministic, by the way? Because you can do that, and then you pull away the challenger, and then if Ninja Duelist plays Badger Bear, you just have the challenger for the Badger Bear on the rally?
Yeah, I believe it would be deterministic. I believe so, but there might be something I'm not seeing.
Yeah, I think this might have been a deterministic turn 6 lethal, but I'm not 100% sure. Regardless of that, we see the position that we are ending up in. We also, funnily enough, see the Badger Bear top deck, so that actually would have come into play. Seeing this Pioneer come down, Pioneer is actually like not bad at actually controlling the board here because there's a bunch of 2-1s and 2-2s here that Pioneer can get rid of for free. It probably forces, okay, we're considering jamming CS. I was gonna say where it probably forces like an Inspiring Light in the worst case. I guess that's what Ninja Duelist is thinking about right now because they're hovering the potential port buffs.
Yeah. Just trying to figure out what one's the best. I understand why you feel pressured to play a CS, but looking at this Physiumi list and seeing how much Pytos they're on, it feels really icky to have to play a CS on this short of a board, playing into Pytos when they're looking for a reason to get Fizz into the air anyways. But definitely not a comfortable position to be in on the side of Ninja Duelist. Definitely a bit of an awkward hand, not hitting any cheap units until turn 5, and just being quite spell heavy.
Yeah, so we end up opting for this Inspiring Light, dropping a little bit out of time, which is obviously a little problematic, but I'm sure Ninja Duelist did that with a lot of thought. And let's see how Methodical answers this. So, what is the card that being over here? That's a Pythos. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. We get rid of the 2-1 because it's never gonna be like removable with the Pythos ever again. Let's see. So this Fizz gets in. Obviously, the Pioneer doesn't really have that many good pulls, but we do get in for 7 damage, which is obviously very meaningful. Even though we could have potentially won the game on this turn, we can still, with the 7 damage connecting, set up a lethal on the next attack token. It's very possible that we get there looking at these two players' hands, since there are the tools to stall, and I don't know if I don't know if Ninja Duelist has quite enough pressure. He might, but it's gonna be close if he does. Here, you just redevelop your units and you try to apply pressure as previously mentioned. It's just really important to keep going and keep trying to tax as many resources from Methodical as possible. Ideally, you want to force this Fist to block, and holy, Marai Warden is an incredible top deck.
I really like the heads-up play of not playing the Sergeant last turn to give us this opening to be able to play the Marai here. Unfortunately, it does play into the Perilous Pastry, but I still like the line. You know, taxing mana is really important. This Fizz Jimmy deck is tight on mana. It's very tight, so getting any bit out matters, and now we kind of have to make the decision of how we're playing out the rest of this turn, which I think that decision is ultimately if we want to Inspiring Light before we FD, because I think our hand is a bit forced in Fort Demacia this turn.
Yeah, I think we are kind of forced to just, as you said, go for Fort Demacia this turn. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's gonna be applying enough pressure with the Three Sisters coming down, right?
Yeah, the Three Sisters will do a lot to alleviate pressure, but you kind of do need to make some sort of play on the side of Ninja Duelist to get this Fizz off the board or try and get these challengers off the board so you can stall out one more attack token. Because there's a lot of hand combinations that are able to try and threaten a lethal against you next turn, right? Like, Fizz is about to level, so a Fury of the North is going to give Fizz plus 4 to get him to 12, essentially, because of the flip. A Stance will do a very similar. Battle Fury will put him over the top, you know, and these are all cards that, as we can see with Caster Vision, Methodical has in hand.
Yeah, so you see this Fort Demacia coming down, Methodical taking his time to think about how he's gonna handle this spot, but it shouldn't be that big of a deal. You're gonna get swung on, but the one thing that Scouts always has had as a weakness is that you can go to 1 HP against Scouts, and as long as you keep MF off the board, it's really difficult for them to actually close out the game from there.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
okay, so electing on the side of Ninja Duelist to go for the Inspiring Light, just applying max pressure, trying to get this Navigator out of the Fizz range from the flip with like the freeze backup, a very heads up play. But now it's kind of almost all the agency on Ninja Duelist side is gone. You know, we get to decide what units we're actually sending in, but that's about it. So really what becomes interesting now is trying to play Methodical side and figuring out how's the best way to get lethal next turn.
Yeah, like Methodical is basically playing solitaire from this position, right? Your opponent's completely tapped out. You know exactly what's about to happen this turn. Like you know Ninja Duelist's entire plan, and all you need to do is figure out how you're winning next turn. And we see they opt to go for the Three Sisters, which makes sense because this Navigator is swinging twice, so it's doing the most amount of damage. We're probably gonna freeze here.
I think. I like the freeze, but I wonder if this was supposed to be a Fury of the North again because of how it.
Yeah, that's valid.
With removing the unit.
Fury of the North was actually probably better because then the Fizz also gets a block if Ninja Duelist was showing lethal, like for example. So yeah, maybe that was better. But also we have the Inner Beast here, so like you can block the Marai Warden with the Fizz and play the Inner Beast.
Yeah, and then Inner Beast, and then yeah, you just have lethal in a bunch of ways. Yeah, with Inner Beast, I think you're right that the freeze is better.
Yeah, I think
this Scout is not doing much on the board. We just need to keep one challenger alive, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, Ninja Duelist knows that the writing's on the wall at this point. Like, unless Methodical disconnects, unless Methodical gives them maybe a little bit too many actions to get a swing in with the CS. But yeah, this Battle Fury comes down somewhere in a small apartment somewhere in Europe. Ricarex is really happy, but also really sad because this Battle Fury is going on Fist for some reason. But Methodical taking down the first set of the night With a clean 2-0, Ninja Duelist is out, and that means sorry, not Ninja. Wait, is that how that works? Yeah, Ninja Duelist is out.
Yeah, Ninja Duelist is out.
Methodical continues playing, so we'll see who Maokai Sapling decide to bring on to beat this menace. But so far, very good games. Outside from like a Best Lethal, it was pretty clean play from both sides. I was pretty happy with the quality that I saw, and I'm really excited to see how this lineup goes, because Jaxor and Fizumi, like, these are not decks that they weren't that popular going into the Open last weekend, so it just speaks to how much the meta can change over time, like, so quickly.
Yeah, and also, like, beyond that, I think Methodical especially is a player who, especially in these Aegis type of formats, really values trying to flesh out the entirety of a lineup and making sure things are really safe. So he's willing to pick up these types of decks to make sure his team's very complete. They cover kind of the whole range of decks and strategies you're able to bring. So I think he's going at it in that angle. And like you said, there was arguably a Miss Lethal, but I think when you look at things from Methodical's side, like, yeah, we probably could have ended the game on turn 6, but we played everything in a really controlled way. We had these freezes. It isn't really reasonable with the hands that were shown for our opponent to kill us in certain times. We have the tools to present lethal on the timings we need. So I think it was really well played. It was just like, yeah, maybe Methodical could have stepped on his neck a little bit harder, really. You know, hit him with the Fizz Lethal, you know. You showed Drizzoff, hey, you're not the only guy who can do a Fizz spell line, all right, buddy? But, you know, just real honest play, getting the job done. And, you know, that's all that was needed this set, so.
Yeah, I will say, this team, the captain, Arax, Methodical was the third player he chose. He pretty much picked the 3 players he wanted. He was really happy with his team. I think he was the captain that was the happiest. And Methodical, his third pick, out of the 6 players we're seeing tonight, is the only player that's still undefeated so far this season. He had a 3-0 record going into this playoff season, and now he started the playoffs with a 1-0. So very, very good choice by Arax, and very much looking forward to the next set. So
yeah,
we'll go to a break. Yeah, go.
I was going to say, very strong opener from Trundle's Trolls, and about to toss it to break, and we'll be back in a few minutes with the next matchup. Let you know who Methodical is up against next in the gauntlet, so don't go anywhere.
Absolutely. Problem is And we are back, everyone. We're going to be watching now Methodical, who won the first set against Ninja Duelist from Trundle's Trolls, go up against Jinden, my fellow EU homie from Makai Saplings. We'll see how this goes. Will Methodical win 2 in a row? Or will Jinden come here and stomp him? Something to keep in mind is that Makai Saplings chose to put Jinden into Methodical. So you would guess that he has a good matchup into Methodical, right? Because they had to choose from 2 players.
Yeah, so you would think so, and we will get into that in a second. I think we're just about to get into decks. And yeah, so this is an Iron Man format, like you were saying. So since Methodical won, he is going to keep playing until he loses or every member of Makai Saplings loses. So he already took down Ninja Duelist, which we saw right before the break, and now, like you said, up against Jinden, and then Makai Saplings also has M-Tux remaining in the pocket.
Yeah, and Jinden's lineup is very interesting, but before we go there, we can just go walk through Methodicals real quickly to update the viewers. We already spoke about the deck, so I'm not going to spend too much time. There's this Galio, Garen Jarvan deck, which is really strong. We got banned last time, so not much to say about that.
From both players, so we didn't see it at all, but hopefully we'll see it one time tonight.
Yeah, moving on, there's the Fizz Yumi that we also saw pick up a win. That deck is really cool. Sometimes you just go really big with the Fizz and your opponent can't really do much about it. And we also have the third deck of this lineup, rounding it all up with a third Freljord deck, which is Jax Ornn, which we saw come in really, really clutch with the Fearsome weapon. And,
and the Wild Claw.
Yeah. Applying just enough pressure to get there. And then we got to the more interesting lineup. As you guys can see with these region combinations, this is something that is... I mentioned something about an anti-meta lineup. This is an anti-meta lineup, ladies and gentlemen. We've got Ashe SI. We've got Ashe SI. Like, this is how miserable we've gotten.
Yeah, so we got the Ashe SI here really trying to bully on these Demacia decks. Decks that really hate dealing with freeze, decks that hate dealing with cards like Eradication and Ruination, and just really trying to take advantage of those decks, which Methodical kind of has a lineup consisting of those.
Yeah, very, very interested to see how this Ashe SI deck is going to do, because it has consistency issues, but when it has a good matchup, it's like got a really, really good matchup. Like, it's a really polarizing matchup table. And we saw it see some success in the Open last weekend. Moving on, we have Shin J4, which is probably like the most common anti-meta pick of this meta.
Yeah, the barriers just really affected this meta. We're in a very mid-range heavy meta, and because of that, effects like Freeze and Ashe and Barrier and Shen are just really effective. Being able to essentially blank an entire combat that one unit is doing is super, super powerful. And the ability that Shen has to turn one barrier into multiple barriers through the likes of like the Kinku Student is really, really powerful.
Yeah, the Kinku Student, which was given to this deck sometime last year, it's been a while, but it really like took the power level to the next stage. And we also saw the Shen buff with the barrier on play. The deck's really strong, it just has some reliance on Shen. Mm-hmm. Moving on, speaking of reliance, we've got Echo Jinx.
Yeah, so if you've played against Echo Jinx, you kind of know this is an Echo on 4 stack almost, but you know, you're predicting 4 times by then. You're very likely to have Echo on 4. And the other thing that Echo does on 4 is he usually, especially against these board-based Demacia style decks that Methodical has, he gets to strike at least once, usually 1 or 2 times before he gets removed, if he even gets removed. And Echo will draw you some cards with that. He'll give you access to things like the Chrono Break, which can revive the full board and give you the rally. And these tools are very, very difficult for board-centric decks like what Methodical has to deal with. So Jinden, in theory, is in a very good position, but we'll have to see if he can actually take that position and close it out.
Yeah, all I can say is that as long as we draw Echo on 4, Shen on 4, Ashe on 4, we're going to be fine here. As far as bans are concerned, I think the ban that makes the most sense here is the Fizz Yumi, because I think we are quite good into Jax Ornn and Jarvan Galio Garen from Jinden's side. I think Methodical is supposed to ban Shen J4, but I'm not 100% sure.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think the Yumi ban makes the most sense. On the side of Jinden, we're trying to beat these decks that want to play by the board, and This Yuumi deck kind of wants to ignore it a little bit, just go like over it, both in the sense of like its units are too big, or sometimes in like the elusive sense. So I think banning that makes a lot of sense. Like you were saying, the ban from Methodical is a lot more interesting because it's trying to figure out like which of these decks is actually going to give you the most trouble. And like you were saying, it being Shen, the barrier does make sense, but dealing with the Chrono Break or dealing with like the eradication and equipment destruction of Ashe is really brutal as well. So I think it's really close ultimately on the side of Methodical, and I can't really fault him if he bans any of these decks.
Yeah, it's honestly like pretty, like they're probably equally hard. I know a lot of people in this position would default to the idea of just banning the deck with the highest power level, which in this case would be Shen J4. Not sure if that's what Methodical defaulted to or not, but these are the bans that are coming down. I do think these are the ones that make the most sense. We'll see if this will basically be a matter of whether Echo Jinx gets a win or not, because I'm expecting Ashe to get a win here, like quite easily, because avoiding the, like, you can never avoid the Ashe versus Galio matchup, but that matchup is just awful for Galio.
Yeah, the one saving grace on the side of Galio in that matchup is you do devalue the freeze a lot, but you walk into every other card in the deck, so it's definitely not a fun matchup.
Yeah, you also don't like entirely devalue the freeze. The freeze can still do things sometimes, which is sometimes is not great when you want to play freezes in your deck, but still like it means that there needs to be a critical amount of mass of freezes in Jinden's hand for it to be a problem.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to put it, because the freeze does have some impact. It can do things in certain situations, especially considering the fact that we're playing these champions that are pretty impactful, that, you know, are very vulnerable to freeze, and Garen and Jarvan, so it's definitely not useless. Also, like popping Galio spell shield, but it's not the highest value. The other part about this matchup, at least on the side of Methodical, that should give him a bit of breathing room, is if he does manage to Q Jax Ornn into Echo, that is his one matchup that is like it's like a very skillful matchup, I would say. So if we get to see that matchup, Methodical actually gets a lot of play there. He isn't fighting such an uphill battle.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Echo Jinx is definitely the deck that like Methodical is trying to pry on here, based on just like the ability of the deck to sometimes hit a fail rate, sometimes just not be able to find Chrono Break. Even if you hit the Echo into Voices, a lot of the time you can handle that if there is no Chrono Break to follow up with. Obviously, it is still going to be difficult, but as you said, the Echo Jax Ornn matchup is very skillful. It requires a few knowledge checks. Like, for example, the Echo Jinx player has to be aware of how impactful Scrying Sands is in that matchup. And the Jax Ornn player has to be aware of like how to maneuver around Echo and play around Chrono Break in the proper way, to not give it too much value. Basically force suboptimal Chrono Breaks instead of just like giving them like a blowout one. Yeah, regardless, we see the Jax Ornn versus Ashe SI matchup happen instead. Obviously, this is pretty good for Jinden in theory, but we'll see. We'll see. It depends a lot on how many freezes we hit. There is, I believe, no vengeances in Jinden's list, so Ornn is going to be difficult to deal with potentially. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting. And there is the Ornn in the hand on the side of Methodical. That is a post-Mole Ornn, so that guy is almost definitely going to be coming down on tier 7, considering, like you said, Hash, there are no vengeances in Jinden's deck. I went ahead and double-checked. And this seems to be a pretty solid curve from the side of Methodical to start the game off. No Jax, you know, you always love to see early, but outside of that, you're getting on the board pretty quickly.
Yeah, and obviously something that's also worth mentioning here is that this is a Quietus deck, and Quietus against Jax Ornn, if you use it correctly, in the sense that you don't just like do it on site. Sometimes it's correct to do it on site, but you don't just brainlessly do it on site. You maybe try to bait your opponent into investing a little bit more into that equipment, perhaps forging it a few times, and then playing the Quietus. It can take a lot of value and slow down Jax Ornn's game plan quite a lot. The one thing that I will be concerned about, though, is whether Jinden is going to be able to handle the board pressure or not. But with a card like Eradication, it should be doable. It should be possible. I'm just worried with no vengeances that this Ornn becomes a little bit more problematic. But we'll see how the game goes.
Yeah, we will see. Ornn does seem very problematic, but we do have the Quietus to deal with the one weapon in hand on the side of Methodical at the moment, and then if we are able to, keep put more weapons off of the table, then this Ornn isn't a very big problem, even if we don't, run into answers to deal with him. We do have these eradications as well, though, which are really effective for trimming the board. So it does look like quite a clunky hand from Jinden. We don't really have win cons at the moment, but it is actually quite stable, all things considered.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Ash SI is that it doesn't really have a progressive game plan that starts from the mid game and then branches out to the late game in the traditional sense of you play like a champion and then you start scaling this champion up and eventually it flips and so on. That's not how Ash SI works. Ash SI is very reactive. It cares a lot about your opponent's game plan, arguably more than your own, and then it just says eventually, because of these proactive freezes, I have Frozen in Fear and the unit that summons another unit that has Overwhelm because of and has attack based on how many times you frozen that game, and then they trade off with the board and then you play Harrowing and then you win with that basically. So it cares about its opponent's game plan a lot more than it cares about its own, is what I'm saying basically.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. We do have a couple of those cards in hand that you were mentioning, but like you were kind of saying, it is just a bit of a waiting game right now to getting to the point where those cards are turned on. Our opponent has tried to advance their game plan enough. We've been able to remove enough stuff and play enough stuff that our Harrowings are actually turned on. And it's not a very, like you were saying, proactive play pattern to get to that point as Ash. Trying to be proactive in that sense generally has you walking into positions you don't want to be in.
Yeah, man, Card Gamer, look at this 4-mana Riptide Sermon.
Whoa, that's broken. 4-mana Riptide Sermon.
So yeah, I mean, this is very, very good for Jinden. It stabilizes the board completely, shuts off the attack, which is it's relevant because Jack's progress goes down, pressure goes down, which means that Ornn needs more time to actually win the game for Methodical. A lot of long-term implications. Methodical still saying, I will swing here regardless, which I don't hate, by the way. I don't know what your thought on this is, Card Gamer. If he swings here, I'm not unhappy with that decision. I think there is some merit to it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting decision on whether or not to swing here. I think it makes sense why you would want to. But it is really awkward to swing into this 2-4 and to kind of give value to this 3-1 that is probably going to end up dying in an eradication. But like we kind of said that with the eradication card, your units on board are also dying to eradication. So it's a very tricky spot because as a Jax Ornn player, you do need to value your units somewhat heavily because units are very important to carry weapons, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to not swing for that argument, basically saying that you want to preserve your board so that when this Combat Cook dies, you can still play this equipment on other stuff. There is substance to it. So, I get the thought process behind Methodical's decision. We see the Brittle Steel being picked up, and Brittle Steel is actually, really good here because of a couple of things. It goes on the Combat Cook, which is obviously, very high impact, unless Methodical ends up putting it out of range. And also, it procs up the bear. I'm just going to call it the bear. It's going to become a 3-4, which means it can block the Artisan.
The bear, huh?
Wait, they're wolves.
Wolf.
Ah, man, I don't know why I said the bear. Okay, the wolf. The wolf. Okay. We see this open pass, and this open pass is, quite sad, usually, because, Jinden has a mana advantage that he can't really capitalize on. However, I don't actually think it's that awful if you actually look at the hand states of both players.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't much to do on the side of Jinden. Like you said, you're not happy about it, but when you look at your hand, you're not doing much. I think at the end of the day, you're pretty alright with where things go. If this is a fish fight coming down on the side of Jinden, I think you're pretty upset that your 2-4 is dying, but you probably just end up ripping this eradication and calling it a day. And, I think if your opponent's willing to give you this pass, you're really happy because of your opponent isn't really pressuring you next turn.
Yeah, the one thing I will say though is that the problem that is gonna persist here from Jinden's side is this like lack of a win con, especially with this Jax coming down. Like we don't, as I said, we like outside of this eradication, we don't have hard removal. We have like a freeze into a soul harvest. Obviously, we see methodical respect ruination and they like to open attack instead of develop. I don't know for sure if this is a correct decision or an incorrect one because it walks into harsh winds very poorly as well. But looking at Jinden's hand, the problem long term is still going to be like eventually we're going to need to hit our Ash, we're going to need to hit our we have our harrowing. We're going to need to hit some more units to make the harrowing more meaningful.
Yeah. We're in a position right now where you're saying like we need to either hit our win cons or we need to hit another harsh wins so we can enable these eradications and we can defend versus open attacks properly, right? So we can stall out until we hit those win cons. And if we don't hit those cards, it's a very scary position to be in.
Yeah, and also using that harsh winds means answering Ornn now is going to be a lot more difficult with Jinden's hand, right? Like we have used harsh winds, and our previous way before this to answer Ornn was to basically harsh winds and to soul harvest it, right?
Yeah.
That's
Soul
gone.
Harvest or harsh winds eradicate.
Yeah. That's gone. That's huge. That's like very, very bad for Jinden if he doesn't end up drawing into an answer for Ornn in the next couple of turns.
Mm-hmm. A very scary position to be in, but we do have quite a bit of cards that can give us an out. Like this Frozen in Fear does turn that on, and it gives us a unit. So probably our best draw. I imagine we just have to open pass into it, which is a little bit sad when our opponent plays an equipment onto a unit, but
we can swing, right?
Yeah, I guess we could swing.
But yeah, generally, as I said, the sentiment is still like you play reactive here. You don't actually care about like you not care is the wrong term, but like you don't actually do anything proactive in this deck in this phase of the game. You still wait for your opponent to come at you, and you're saying, "I will just deal with your threats." As you said, Methodical is just gonna play 2 mana, create a big threat on the board. So that's obviously pretty bad for Jinden because he wanted a more like a bigger mana commitment. Like passing here is a lot worse. But I think you potentially still do it.
I don't know if you're allowed to rip it now, just because like the threat of an Ornn is so scary, and this 3/1 can just jump down the 5/4 next turn.
Yeah, rip what?
I thought you were talking about. Oh, are you talking about ripping the Ornn or ripping like the freeze?
No, I was saying Jinden could still pass.
Oh yeah. Okay. I thought you were saying to use the freeze wolf.
No. I think passing here was completely fine. We see this Ornn coming down. This Ornn's gonna die. Bye. Frozen in Fear really coming in clutch. This was like a really, really important top deck here.
Mm-hmm. Especially because there isn't a strike on the side of Methodical at the moment. So this 5/4 is going to do a lot to really hold down the board against, most of the units that Methodical has the ability to play.
Yeah, and we can see on the side of the screen here that Ash is flipped, and people like maybe think that's not that relevant, but in this deck, an Ash flip snowballs very quickly, like very, very, very quickly. So once we hit her, we are going to be able to transition into more of a win con.
Mm-hmm. And here's kind of a little bit of an unsung part of the power of this Ornn, which is having another quick attack weapon is so good right now, and being able to tax out and grind down Jinden.
Yeah, and this Jax is just applying a ton of pressure. Like it might just straight up force Brittle Soul Harvest here because it's flipping. And when it gets met by Brittle Soul Harvest, if Jinden does that, if I'm Methodical, I'm ripping this Fury of the North.
Well, the thing is, if you don't pre-combat, pre-Brittle Steel, and you go to just Soul Harvest, right, you get blown out by Fury. But you walk into like another freeze, so it's really scary to do it on the side of Methodical, right? Like, it's really easy to say that with Caster Vision, but like, it's pretty scary. You can maybe say you have a bit of a hand read that Jinden doesn't have a freeze, but okay, and it looks like Jinden being very respectful of the Fury, of the combat tricks.
Yeah, and like here, Fury doesn't do enough because the Jack still dies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Jack's going away, being respectful from Jinden's side. I don't mind. The only issue here is that we are going pretty low on value. We might end up being forced to play like a pretty suboptimal harrowing next turn. Not 100% sure. I think like if Methodical does end up swinging the Ceaseless Sentry, getting a draw is something Jinden's going to be very, very happy with, because right now we have two eradications that aren't doing a whole lot because we didn't find a spot to use them in the early game, and the equipment in the late game scales really well into that card, makes the card really, really bad for Jinden, because Jackson just keeps playing units that are out of eradication range.
Mm-hmm. Definitely making the card awkward and a bit dead. And yeah, like you were saying, we're really going to rely a lot on this Ceaseless Sentry to do some heavy lifting.
Yeah, like I would not be surprised that if like we just don't draw optimally, we decide to rip the Harrowing because it's the only thing we can do, because we don't actually have reactive tools to deal with any of the threats that Methodical presents. And then we get met with Buried in Ice, and then on the next token, Methodical tries to set up a lethal somehow. But Jinden is at 17 HP, and there are still a lot of draws that can act as payoff. These are not what Jinden was hoping for, though, I imagine.
Yeah, this is definitely not ideal. Looking to rip the Harrowing here, potentially. Probably decided Jinden just looking at what we're getting. I know we're getting 2 Overwhelm Wolves and then just a couple small units, which I don't think is doing quite enough yet. I think these Wolves are at 6 or 7. I think they're at 6 now. We can get them to 7 with the freeze, which isn't quite enough.
I'm not even sure if the Harrowing was getting 6 units. I think it might have not been getting 6 units.
Yeah, I think it's 5 units.
2 wolves, one archer, 1 sentry.
Oh, 4, yeah. It might have only been 4. Definitely a tough spot. Like you were saying when we were looking at this Ash deck originally, it can definitely have some consistency issues, to say the least.
Yeah, and I mean, I also wouldn't necessarily attribute this to consistency issues. We see just like a deck building risk going on here, where there's like 2 eradications sitting against Jaxor, not really doing much.
Yeah.
Soul Cleave not really doing much here either. I will say that Jinden is still able to stall out for a little bit, but time is running out, like slowly but surely. Ooh, with that Jax top deck, I'm not positive we are able to stall out. Methodical opts to go for the open attack still, maybe pre-committing the Wildcast Varsity and just saying I'm gonna play around Icefell Archer and Ruination. Maybe defensive Harrowing as well.
Mm-hmm. Also could potentially just be saying I'm okay putting you down to 3, and I will just get the lethal if you're on 3 eventually.
That's also valid, yeah.
Buried in Ice, I can play this game for a while. I think you have a lot of options on the side of Methodical. With how the game's played out and the type of hand read you have and the way your opponent used the Brittle Steel Soul Harvest on Jax, I think you can kind of tell they're on a gunked up hand. You kind of can tell they have a Harrowing because of how they hover.
The hover. Yeah.
So I think you probably have a pretty strong hand read as Methodical, and just trying to make sure things don't go too crazy off the rails.
Alright, so we opt to play this Wildcard Varsity and just show lethal, and looking at Jinden's hand, there's nothing here he can do. Methodical picking up the win with Jaxorn into Ashes Eye, a matchup you would not expect Jaxorn to win, but we see these eradications, we see the lack of vengeances potentially also attributed to this loss, but also no Ash, not enough draw to find Ash, not enough proactive cards in general. If Jinden had a little bit more units to get to like a better Harrowing, I guess since Methodical had Buried in Ice, there would have still been a game, but it would have definitely been a lot better for Jinden. Unfortunately, that means that now Methodical leading 1-0 only needs to pick up 1 more win, but that win has to come from Galio, and Galio is gonna struggle against these eradications.
Yeah, Galio, like you were saying, will not have fun against Eradication. Those cards will not be bricked up in his hand this matchup. And we're actually queuing up Echo Jinx first, and this deck will also, in theory, have a pretty good matchup. not the most aggressive hand, not the best Echo hand in terms of getting on the board and being able to set up chips, set up for your Chrono Breaks perfectly, but we do have the predict we need. Quicksand is a very good tool for keeping Echo alive in this matchup, so it actually does look pretty reasonable if we can sort of predict into the right pieces.
Yeah, let's see. The first checkpoint that you pass when you play Echo Jinx is you pass the breaking checkpoint. And here, Jinden has passed it with flying colors. Ancient Prep, Chronomancer, Feral Prescience, that's 3 predicts already. We got a second Chronomancer here, as we can see. So this is a pretty solid start from Jinden. Like, he has the predicts. Echo is already flipped because we have 4 in our hand. We also hit a drop border right off the bat.
And a Scrying Sands. I feel like you take the Scrying Sands and you're in a great position.
Scrying Sensing is Formidables is probably still good because there is we know it's probably still correct to think the Scrying Sands in that spot, but it's not like as a snap pick as usual into mid-range decks. And we see this Jinx, which means like with Jinden's hand texture, it is possible for us to pivot into a Jinx game plan. By the way,
yeah, definitely. That's one thing I think is really undervalued a lot in this iteration of the deck is people flexing into the Jinx game plan, and it'll be interesting to see if Jinden elects to. I think we went for a skip on the last predict. And getting the Bakai, so...
Yeah, Bakai is really good here. Like, this is just like... Oh, and the second draw board there as well. Like, this is, like, as far as Jinx is concerned, not necessarily Echo because he's missing an action right now, but as far as Jinx is concerned, this is quite a good start for her. Like, we will be able to flip her as long as we don't draw really clunky, which, given this is Echo, there is the potential to do that, but I do think with Jinden's current hand texture, he's supposed to play for this.
Yeah, and going for the Jinx, I actually really like picking up another Jinx here, just like helping go for the Jinx game plan and reaching the burnout, because it's also going to help you get out any clunky cards in your hand. But it looks like on Jinden's side, just electing for the skip, really playing into this Echo game plan. And
not 100% sure if we skipped, by the way, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think it was a skip. We'll see. But it's interesting to see how we're trying to play out this spot on the side of Jinden, because they do have a challenger. They are going to remove a unit, and when you are playing Echo, you generally want to have a full board to get better value once your Echo comes into play for Chrono Breaks and the voices, but this is a lot of potential damage to be giving up, so it's a difficult decision.
It is a difficult decision to make. I do think you are supposed to probably swing, but I understand why Jinden would feel reluctant here, because like you do if you lean for the Echo game plan, you do want to preserve your board. You do want to eventually get that voices of the Risen and get your entire board to be buffed, and then that is when you end up swinging. But here, we don't have these cards, and we also have Jinx. And what does Jinx like? Jinx likes burning your opponent down. So the full swing might have been good. Not 100% sure what the correct line is. It's a pretty difficult spot to play from Jinden.
Yeah, definitely not an easy spot. Your deck is giving you a lot of difficult decisions to try and make. You've had options, but it's not your plan A in Echo, and figuring out plan B and C and how to best navigate that in Echo is very, very difficult, because Echo is a deck which is designed to put so much power in its plan A at the expense of plan B and C and D. So pivoting to those games is really tricky in figuring out how to do it best, or if it's even an option.
And like you might say this Quicksand is great because it's another copy of Quicksand into a formidable deck, but it's also just not progressing our game plan. It's the Jinx is harder to flip. It's going to take a little bit more time. We can't really develop anything proactively here without overwriting a unit, so we lose some amount of value. Methodical took a really good pass last turn after the Feral Prescience, in my opinion.
Yeah, a really heads-up pass. I think one thing that is really easy to kind of skip over when watching Methodical's gameplay, especially because he's not going for any of like the flashy or stylish cool plays that's going to stand out, is Methodical's just been very disciplined and has been doing a very good job of trying to put his opponent on a pretty accurate range and then playing around it well.
Yeah, and now Jinden, we can see here, is roping because this is a very difficult spot, and we like to go for the Jinx. Not sure if it's right or wrong, but as I said, it was a difficult proactive play to make, but you do feel the pressure to make this proactive play because If you don't, you're not really progressing your game plan fast enough. And yes, this is supposed to be a good matchup, but at the same time, if you give Galio a little bit too much time, you just get a lot bigger than you, especially when you don't have the Echo game plan going, because then you don't find voices, and then you just actually just straight down into all of their units.
Yeah, and like even when you do have the voices and you trade evenly, that isn't really how you always win the game as Echo. A lot of times you really rely on having this big chrono break to really kind of break your opponent's back and really go over the top in value and tempo on them. And our opponent kind of denying us that, our deck denying us that opportunity, and our opponent playing very smart around that really is making it difficult for Jindan to figure out the best way out of this game.
Yeah, and I'm assuming with the way Jindan swung here, given this block, we're going to press OK and not play Quicksand proactively, but I do think Jindan was open to proactively Quicksanding there.
Yeah, I think so as well.
So next turn we have mana to flip Jinx if we take this Mystic Shot. We can also take the Time Trick and it also flips Jinx. Right? Yeah.
Both flip Jinx, as long as we play the Time Trick last.
As long as we do not skip. Yeah, we did not skip. We hit Time Trick.
It looks like, going for the Time Trick. I'm guessing we're looking for an Echo.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't hate the time. I don't hate the Time Trick. I think it was actually better than the Mystic. And here, this Quicksand is gonna blow out Methodical like pretty decently.
Yeah, having two Quicksands is going to do a lot, because the other thing that this Quicksand is going to do is it's going to make the champion strength not nearly as effective as it could be this turn. And that's going to really throw off Methodical's ability to punch through, either in the sense that he's not being as mana efficient as he could be this turn with how he's developing, or in the fact he's just playing a suboptimal CS.
Yeah, it's a CS you're not happy with. Like, Galio is typically not happy when the CS isn't pushing lethal, or if the CS is not being used as like a part of a power spike. Like, CS is often really good in this deck if you're going like CS to win the game, or if you're going like CS to apply pressure into like Galio next turn, or like Garen next turn. And it just like overwhelms your opponent and gives them too many threats for them to be able to deal with efficiently. But here, that's not happening from Methodical side. You're kind of, if you do end up playing the CS this turn, you're kind of just saying, it's like kind of my only option here, and I'm not particularly happy about doing it, but I kind of have to.
I'm going to just elect to flip the Jinx right here. I think it makes some sense, just saying I want this. Like, you don't really have really effective combinations of cards to play to deal with me. And just really valuing this Rocket, which I think makes sense. Ooh, the Voices is a really powerful pickup, but it does make it hard to flip Jinx next turn. So
I think the trade-off in power is good enough. I think.
Yeah.
I think so. Here we can potentially see Elixir of Iron come down on the Broadwing to preserve one more unit for when we play the CS.
I don't even know if that's worth it though, because this Broadwing is at -1 power, right? So it's only going to be a 3 attack unit. It's probably just better to play a Geralt this turn.
If we play a Geralt this turn, and then next turn Jindan plays Voices, Methodical plays CS. Yeah, Geralt might be better. Yeah.
We'll see. You also have the ability to go like 2-drop, 3-drop this turn as well, so you definitely have some good options, right?
That's also true. Like, this Broadwing can fulfill a similar role to Geralt next turn.
Just depending how you value the flexibility of your mana, because I believe this line actually plays better into the Galio top deck, whereas like my line works a little bit better if you top deck like a 2-drop. So it just depends on what you're trying to play into, right?
Yeah, and as explained previously, like this Galio does like facilitate the CS better as well. So I understand this approach that Methodical has said. Like, as you said, like outside of like a potentially misdeterministic lethal, Methodical's been very disciplined and the play has been generally clean, I think.
I mean, we say it's a mislethal, but like when you think about the hand that your opponent is representing and like how you're allowed to win the game and when you need to apply clock and what tools you have, like I don't even think it's really a misplay. Like he's pretty much winning deterministically. It's like, oh, you didn't win as hard as you could have. Type, you know. I've been very impressed with Methodical, is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Yeah. I think saying that Methonical's been playing really well is not wrong. It's definitely like worth crediting. And we see Jinden here being in a bit of a like weird spot because we need 2 actions to get Rocket, but also we opponent only needs 1 action to get CS. And we don't really have an answer to CS. Like this voices does increase the power of all of our units, but it does not increase it high enough to actually deal with the CS. Honestly, having to use these quicksands to flip Jinx last turn was not ideal. It was the correct play. Like it was the cost of flipping Jinx, but it was a pretty hefty cost because now Methodical knows like quicksands are gone, so the CS is always applying enough pressure.
Yeah, very tricky spot to try and navigate out of by Jinden. Despite only having a small amount of decisions to make, it's very difficult decisions to make.
Yeah, that's the story. As you said, like that's the story of Echo. It's like when you hit the game plan that your deck is built for, which is like the Echo into Voices Chrono Break plan. You're very happy, and it's like not entirely straightforward, but it gets a little linear. The decisions are few, but they're not insanely difficult. But when it doesn't hit, when you have to play these weird Jinx games, Voices games without the Chrono Break, and it's like really wacky because your deck isn't actually getting to use its like proper intended payoff, it gets a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And just on the side of Jinden, just trying to figure out the way to navigate out of this position. The pass is cheeky because I think you are pretty happy when your opponent doesn't swing and you don't actually have an effective way to apply pressure. I don't know if like generating a rocket is even that meaningful at this point when you're incinerating like a unit, but I don't know if Jinden has a way out of this game when Methodical takes the swing.
Yeah, like you pull this Jinx, you force enough blocks here. Voices can still live, so we do end up trading decently next turn, I think. But there's also a Garen coming down and an Elixir to save 1 unit. Yeah, this is looking quite rough for Jinden, actually. I see Methodical opting to go for this line instead, which
I like this drag better.
Yeah, since we're at 12, I think it's fine, right? Since we are at 12, I think that is fine.
It's pretty unlikely, right? Because you're assuming that Jinx can get a rocket here. And, like, let's say Jinx does Mystic. Like, it's pretty unlikely for Jinx to end up having the burnout, right? Like, even Mystic into GE with, like, double rockets, they're still 1 off next turn. So if you're killing them next turn, then they're just dead, right?
Yeah. I think this line is fine because of that. Like we are at a high enough amount of HP to have the luxury to do this. It was just something that we needed to be aware of. Okay.
Yeah. Well, so like you do the calculation, and it's only 11 you can take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, precisely. So this is what we're seeing go down right now. Let's see the draws from Jinden's side: Scrying Sands and the Mystic Shot. So this does actually give us an out, kinda, where we can like go Scrying Mystic here to get the rocket, and we survive. Do we survive? Yeah, we survive at 1, right?
So we Scrying on like what?
Garen?
And then we take 6, and we Mystic Face, and then we do.
Oh, yeah. We Garen. Yeah, we got, so it takes 6. Yeah, it's what you said. So yeah, we need to like find another Jinx, most likely.
We need to hit another Jinx and then like draw into like burn with that Jinx. But there are outs. It's very slight, but there are outs.
Yeah, so you Scrying it, we hit the other Jinx. Okay, that's a start.
Mystic Face.
No, you just press OK here because Jinx isn't dying.
Oh yeah. They need to play the Elixir.
Yeah. Do you Mystic this Broadwing instead of Face?
Mystic the Broadwing, then you get a GE from Jinx, right?
It's lethal if you do this. It's lethal. Yeah. Okay, so we have, I think, deterministic lethal. I don't think Methodical ever has enough actions to get out of this. Yeah, you play Rocket here, you start your turn with GE, and then no matter what Methodical does, it doesn't actually matter. He needed exactly Gentleman's Duel in the spot to win the game. Gentleman's Duel would have won the game because you flip Garen. What a nail biter, dude. Holy. And we see the Echo coming down saying hi to us. Alright. So, it goes to 1-1.
Crazy game.
Yeah, wow. Like, honestly, I never want to play Echo Jinx when I don't draw Echo, man. These games are so difficult, dude.
Yeah. And taking us to game 3. Wow. I'm still in shock at seeing how that one went. But that was exciting.
And game 3 is the boogeyman. It's the Ashe assigned to Galio Garen. That's gonna be rough for Methodical. Obviously, there are still ways for Methodical to win the game, especially because like there is no vengeance. So Jarvan and Garen are gonna be a lot happier than usual in that matchup. But your opponent's gonna play Galio, and you're gonna play 3-mana kill Galio after you pop Spell Shield somehow. And opponent's gonna be really sad. Like we see, look at this. There's a Bale in there, and then there's a Soul Harvest, and Jin is just laughing at his opponent here. Like it is the hard counter, Like if there is one deck that you would never want to run into as formidables, it is probably not Ashe SI, but because there are freezes in that deck, but it would be something in SI. So Ashe is pretty damn close.
Yeah, it's definitely a rough matchup. And we see the Eradication in hand. We see the Soul Harvest in hand. A Ruination in hand, just making it really tricky for Methodical to try and navigate out of this spot. But we'll see how he tries to go about it.
Yeah, like, and also this time we see the Ashe. So like there will be some form of progression of game plan. Obviously, Ashe is not as impactful in this matchup as usual because we've said already, like freezes are not ideal, but they still have some application, and Ashe is still what you're going to use as your win con because when she flips, which will take some time, but when she flips, no formidable units can block.
That is true. That is very, very oppressive into the formidable deck, just being able to essentially Ashe arrow their board without playing the Ashe arrow when she's flipped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we see the Balin come down, and it's not going to be answered. So, like, you might think that this is great because the Balin buff happens and all of the formidable units get value. But there's an eradication in Jinden's hand. There's a ruination in Jinden's hand. There's going to be more quietus, more soul harvest to be drawn into eventually. All of these tools, they don't care, largely speaking, about the Balin buff.
Yeah, they're just able to ignore them, especially with, like you said, the amount of board-wide buffs that we have, really trying to punish our opponent for overcommitting to a large board, which is kind of what they need to do to push through us.
Yeah. Although, with that being said, Jinden is, again, gonna need to like take a lot of time to actually get there with this deck because it's very reactive, as previously stated, right? Like he's not anywhere near a kind of a counter matchup of like, oh, I will just die and get ran over. No, your opponent's gonna need to take time to react to everything you do. Methodical kind of needs to time his threats in the appropriate way to maneuver through Jinden's reactivity. But if it gets there, if Jinden is able to deal with what Methodical has, because Methodical is on a deck with low value, and Jinden is on a deck that has a lot of efficient answers to most of Methodical's units, it can get pretty difficult, but it just takes time.
Yeah, most definitely. Definitely is just a real question about like how well can the Ashe player time their answers against the Galio's player's threats, right? And we might find Jinden in a bit of a trickier position than he really wants to be because of the early Soul Harvest we use on the Broadwing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is something I was going to mention as well. I think, a lot of SI decks would Soul Harvest the Broadwing there. A lot. I think this might be one of them that doesn't do that because you don't actually care too much about the Broadwing pulling a unit. Like, you care more about Balin scaling so that in the late game when you're like out of resources to kill formidable units efficiently, you don't get met by like a 1-mana 0/5 Petricide Hound, for example. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That was more of my logic, right? And like you were kind of saying in the Mulligan, how strong the Soul Harvest can be on the Balin. But it does do a lot to remove the early Broadwing as well and take control of the map, of the board. And big fan of that glimpse right there, actually, because we are saying we're going to need to eradicate before our opponent attacks again, so just electing to get the card draw to filter a bit better.
Yeah, also, I don't mind ripping the eradication there, by the way. I'm not sure if it's correct, but I didn't mind it in theory. Thought it was fine. Because now our mana is a little tighter. Like if we go eradication here and our opponent redevelops a bunch of formidable units, we are in a little bit of a pickle. If we did the eradication last turn, we can just open past this turn, and then there is a Ruination Harsh fork, right? If they develop, they walk into Ruination. If they just try to open, we just harsh their units.
Yeah. Definitely gives us a bit more play, but we definitely are a bit backed up, a little bit on the back foot. Not the easiest spot from Jinden. So, just because, like you were saying, we are a bit backed up on mana, and if they develop Formidables, the freeze is not particularly effective.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Jinden does here, because open passing is not an option, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to do something here. You've got to do something.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
I think this Ruination makes the most sense. Just because the eradication doesn't actually answer the Badger Bears, right?
Yeah, but are you dead on the open?
Yeah, I was about to say. That being said, are we about to get balled on?
I think this Balin wins the game next open attack.
Well, if they don't have a trick, we do live on one.
Gentleman's dual press done.
Oh, yeah. And then Sky Splitter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is tragic because this is probably gonna end up happening. We harsh wins here. I think Methodical could just straight go for the lethal here because an open deck list, so we know our opponent's list. Yeah, this is just guaranteed lethal.
Yep.
And Methodical takes it down. Yeah, wow. I think we just got a little bit too backed up on mana there and didn't time our like removal in the correct order. And Methodical was able to capitalize on that. And these Balin buffs, that Soul Harvest that earlier went on Broadwing, is something that Jinden probably really regrets. Methodical takes it down, goes 2-1, remains undefeated this season. So he's like 5-0 so far. We'll see if they're able to clean it out with a sweep now that they need to only play against one more player of Maokai Sapling. Really, really intense set.
Yeah, really intense set. Really well played by Methodical. I think this guy's been playing some really, really clean Runeterra tonight. Obviously, no one plays perfect Runeterra, but this guy, he's making like 98% of the right decisions. And, you know, when you make that many right decisions, that's how you go 5-0 in Aegis. So let's see if he can make it 6. And we will be back after this break with MTux versus Methodical. See if MTux can do the reverse sweep or Methodical can end 6-0. So make sure to stick with us.
Stay tuned.
make yourself remember, darling. Don't look for me, I'm just a story you've been told. So let's pretend a little longer, 'cause when we're gone, everything goes on. You were staring at the window, and I said, I wanna take you to the sea. And when I'm better, we'll do everything. I gotta stop making promises I can't keep. But if I was gone tomorrow, won't the waves crash on? Is it selfish that I'm happy as we pass the setting sun? Someday I'll be overcast, but you won't have to cry, 'cause we'll do the grieving while I'm by your side. I said, don't try to make yourself remember, darling. Don't look for me, I'm just a story you've been told. So let's pretend a little longer, 'cause when we're gone, everything goes on. And I'm so scared of getting used to this. All the vines that keep you tethered in your room. Well, someday both of us are leaving here, but for now I'll just bring this sea to you. Will you meet me in the daylight like we did before? Then I felt you on my shoulder, and you weren't suffering anymore. You said, I'm sorry that you worried, but don't apologize. I told you to forget me, but you stayed by my side when I said, don't try to make yourself remember, darling. Don't look for me, I'm just a story you've been told. So let's pretend a little longer, and when we're gone, everything goes on.
Welcome back, guys. We are potentially back now for the last time tonight, because this was a set that was really like surprising. We didn't really expect Jinden to not beat Methodical with a counter lineup. Unfortunately, some draws didn't land the way that they did. Some plays were maybe a little worse than they could have been. But Methodical with a 2-0 so far only needs to play against MTuck now. And if he wins and gets across the finish line, it's going to be a 3-0. So we'll see how it goes, but looking very good for Trundle Strolls right now.
Yeah, potential match point for Trundle Strolls, a really strong position, and Methodical has a pretty decent lineup into MTux. It's definitely not an easy position for MTux to be in. And I think we're about to hop in and see those real quick. So yeah, it's Methodical's lineup again. We finally got to see the Galio, see why it has such a high presence in the World Qualifier Open. It's just a very strong deck. Into the decks it's supposed to be, and as we saw, it can actually hold up kind of okay against some of its counter decks. Just like Hash was saying earlier, it has overstated units, which can really make it difficult for the opponent to deal with effectively.
Yeah, precisely. We've already seen Methonical's deck, so just to go through them really quickly again. We have Viziumi, which we saw once. It was a really nice game. And then we also have Jax Ornn to round off this triple Ferrywild kind of like anti-Jananila. It hasn't played against Jananila so far, and it's about to, by the way. We'll see how that goes. But that, I think, was one of the main intents of this lineup. So this is what MTech is on. We start with Darius Nar. This is a deck that had a pretty high play rate and a pretty solid win rate at the start of the season, but has fallen off over time. However, MTech has adapted to that with some specific decks like the Ballista, the Combat Cook, the Elixirs of Iron. Not sure how impactful they're going to be, but this deck is very strong when it hits. The only problem is that it doesn't hit often enough.
Yeah, definitely a good way to put it. It has a very powerful curve, and when you're able to curve out, it's very, very strong. But once you start playing off curve, things definitely slow down a lot.
Moving on to the next deck, MTech has brought his own iteration of Galio. This one plays 3 copies of Garen, 2 copies of Galio only, and also 1 copy of Single Combat, which I am a fan of the Single Combat. I think a 4th strike spell, given your lineup, if you want to play into certain matchups, makes a lot of sense. Both of these players opted for 2 Aegis, 1 Spear. I like that split a lot as well. I think Joral is very underrated, so I am very happy to see that. Otherwise, it's pretty standard than what you would expect from a Galio Garen, rather, Formidable's list.
And then rounding out the lineup, we have the one John and Nyla of this match. And we have a no temple version, and we have a list that is a bit built for the mirror as well. We have a couple copies of Divine Draft to really try and pick off these Windborn Mariners and prevent some of the tempo and counter smork. We have the Aftershock to deal with tempos, and then for our win columns, we're on a 2-2 split of the Boat and the Helmsman. I'm a very, very big fan of the Boat. I think it's really important for closing out some of your unfavored matchup, and then Elefante, George, the Helmsman. It's just a very strong card. The value is really good, helps flip Janna, can do a lot of different things depending on what cards you put in the pool. Just very powerful pieces of top end.
Yeah, I think this is quite an interesting list. As you said, it's a little bit better attacked with the Divine Draft. Also, the Aftershock that we've been seeing resurging because of landmark removal for things like primarily Temple. Also, the split of Tide Dancer and Helmsman. I think Tide Dancer is going to be able to put in a lot of work if MTech navigates his game properly into Methonical's lineup, because the kind of counter pressure that Tide Dancer applies against Methonical's decks is like quite meaningful, because it requires Methonical to either enter a race and put himself into burn ranges, or trade down his board before being able to buff it with like a Galio, a CS, or benefiting off of a Jax flip, for example. Moving on to bans though, what are we expecting for the bans?
I would probably be expecting both players to ban Galio. Potentially, I see an argument for MTux to ban the Jax Ornn, but I think I'd likely be banning the Galio in this position. I played a similar list to MTux in the World Qualifier of John and Nyla, and I found the Jax Ornn and the Viziumi matchup to be much more manageable with Tide Dancers, so I'd be interested to see if MTux agrees with me in the bans as well.
Yeah, I think that assessment kind of makes sense. Did you mention what Methonical you would expect from him to ban, or?
Yeah, I think both players are just banning Galio.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. There is one thing to consider, as I think Darius Nar beats Viziumi.
Usually yes, but Methonical and I believe Drizzt is also on this version of Viziumi that has a bit extra freeze and a bit extra stun.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, well, given that, I think these bans do make a lot of sense. Galio also, we just see like this deck showed up for the World Qualifier, has transferred over because it's very resilient into Aegis, and it's been banned more often than not. And that just speaks to how winning its winning matchups are and how many winning matchups it has. Doesn't matter which lineup it is, doesn't matter who is being queued into you. Like, if there isn't a lineup like Jinden's with like the SI stuff, which are sacrificing like a chunk of power level to go into, Galio often just gets banned because it just beats everything else.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The deck is very, very strong. I mean, it's a deck that I played day one of the Open, and then, you know, I built my lineup to ban it and just ignore it day two because the deck is that strong. And, you know, we're going to see it, you know, today in its representation and ban rate, and I imagine it'll be a pretty similar story tomorrow as well.
Yeah, not sure how many Galios we have tomorrow, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have a good chunk. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that happen tomorrow as well. Galio definitely like presenting itself as a very much established, I think it's fair to say at this point, tier 1 deck, probably. Obviously not that important for people outside of Aegis anymore because this meta is being moved on from shortly, in like a week. So not really that big of a deal anymore, but it is kind of nice to see that there was innovation, because a lot of people thought the format was going to be solved.
Mm-hmm. We definitely love to see innovation. Meta's changing, things evolving. It keeps things fresh. But speaking of keeping things fresh, we have Jack's Ornn again, but this time it looks like we actually got to play a Jack's hand.
Yeah, we haven't seen Jack's hands so far today. And I will say, like, looking at this hand Mythonical has, this Elixir of Iron is gonna be very good for this curve. You go Jax, you go Castaway, you have Elixir of Iron to back up with any to back up with, like, defense from any removal, which MTech may or may not use, and that's gonna help him a lot with applying pressure. Help Mythonical a lot with applying pressure.
Mm-hmm. And I actually really like this decision from MTux of updrafting not the Helmsman, not George, and instead going for the Divine Draft, recognizing that it's very low chances they're going to be X1s we're able to pick off, and that this Helmsman on turn 7, especially when we play it into an Ornn to try and like set up our own board or grab like this Whirlwind that we have in hand to, you know, kill a unit and stop the Ornn flip, has an insane amount of value. And it's even okay to play for 7 men. I really like that play, really heads up, as well as playing the Miriam last turn to set up, to dig for the Janna, set up the mana for the Vikrash, just trying to keep everything really smooth going into this, what is hopefully a good turn for Janna, because I think MTux is in a really great position if things start lining up to actually turn the corner and close his game how he wants, even though he's facing a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I mean, like, the Castaway going for the quick attack here is like a lot of pressure, not necessarily because like of the keyword, but because of what like it implies. Like, if it incentivizes MTech to point removal, because you don't get to trade when you block here, and when you get to point this removal, Mythonical gets to play his Elixir of Iron, and you end up taking 7 damage, which is in a Jax hand pretty difficult, pretty problematic, because Jax will eventually flip and become difficult to remove, and then eventually turn into a win con, because he's like sort of a 2-mana alpha wild claw, as someone I know likes to say. This Janna top deck from MTux though is very nice, especially knowing that there's a Slipstream on the way and that there is already a Tide Dancer in this hand. Can, as you said, easily snowball in favor of MTech. Like, we can easily end up seeing like a turn 6, turn 8 win.
Yeah, I would imagine you would want to go for a turn 8 win with the texture of this hand a lot of the time. But that being said, using that 2 mana on the Mystic Shot, like you were saying, what the quick attack incentivizes, is extremely punishing in terms of having all the mana properly set up to get this Janna doing what you want her to be doing at the correct points. And we'll probably see it with the draws this turn, where things end up just being a little bit tighter than we're actually happy with on mana.
Yeah, like, we kind of need Miriam, right? We need the Miriam to refill spell mana to kind of be able to crawl back, but then that also loses some value. Also, Mythonical going like really aggressively here, because I think I don't think this flips Jax, so it like gives your opponent 2 pretty big overwhelm threats to deal with, forces you to use your mana immediately, which is also a pretty big factor. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if MTech just goes Divine Werewolf, clear one of the units, play the Windborn Mariner this turn, and then Slipstream next turn to get your Janna discounts and try to snowball from there. It's not great, but it's honestly not awful. Like I can see MTech crawling out of this somehow.
Yeah, we do have some ways to crawl out of it, especially if we're able to just survive next turn. And I really like putting up this 2-3 to help us survive next turn, recognizing that that's the game plan. And when we recognize that this is the game plan as well, I think it might actually be smart to maybe not play the Windborn Mariner yet, because we're probably almost always playing Slipstream next turn, and we just kind of recognizing, once we see a little bit more hand texture, what this Windborn Mariner needs to do, if it's supposed to be a combo piece with the Tide Dancer. Playing it now is usually fine as well.
It's very valid, and we see this Divine Draft coming back in here. It's honestly not bad because it's got a target, which it usually doesn't in this matchup.
Yeah, not only does it have a target, but it also is extremely cheap.
Yeah, and Janna flips, so
Definitely all strong things. We're going to be able to use the Tide Dancer on our next token, most likely. So it's really just about surviving, and if we're able to swing that through the next token.
yeah, this will be just a matter of like for this is a very binary game plan for MTech at this position, right? Where it's like I'm gonna play my hand out, and then next turn Methonical's either gonna be able to kill me, or I'm gonna be able to crack back on my next token, and that's it. Like it's very reliant on whether Methonical has the tools to end the game next turn or not, pretty much.
Yeah, and with this Buried in Ice, he might just be able to with Buried in Ice into a swing, but we'll have to see.
I have to see. Tuck is starting his next turn with like 2 cards because Janna is flipping, so we're gonna be seeing 2 discounted cards. And this isn't the Temple version, so your draws don't snowball as insanely as that version. But Janna Nila is still capable of like doing some really dumb things.
Yeah, most definitely. And just seeing what Methodical wants to do, how he's trying to hold up mana for next turn. Yeah, I think this makes sense, sending a face, but I'm just thinking about if there's any breakpoints that matter by sending it at a unit, potentially trying to get Brash through over Jax.
If anything, it's a breakpoint to send it face, right? Like
Yeah,
you do this, you put them to 9, you swing with Johnny, you put them to 6. Burn ranges get a lot more tighter for MTUC.
Yeah, I believe that is the correct line.
2 Divine Werewolves have already been used, so it's like really unlikely that we end up being able to kill Methodical on the next turn when we draw the cards. But it is possible to like do that on the next token and potentially get a win in through Buried in Ice.
We did play 2 Divine Whirlwinds and a Mystic though, so it is pretty hard to get the reach, but makes sense because the other thing we can do if we full send and they don't play another unit, they don't combat trick, is we put them down to 3, which then is a burn range, so it's very close. It's definitely both ways.
It is very close. Also, like, I guess this Artesian is gonna come down here because I was gonna start entertaining the idea of full swing. But I think it's unlikely. It's unlikely. John is just gonna get in, and we're gonna just start jump block and stall out for overturn. Okay, never mind. We do full swing. MTUC is a Giga Chad.
Yeah, I like it because you have the read. They don't have a 1 mana combat trick based on last turn, right?
Yeah, you do have the read, and I guess you did tap under anything else. Yeah, I can see this being fine. I can see this being fine. It's also best into Ornn, isn't it?
I believe so. And another Tide Dancer, which is not the best draw, but it does end up being pretty nice because it is a big unit you can end up putting in front of an overwhelm threat, and it keeps you drawing cards to really help the Tide Dancer problem.
No. I think this Tide Dancer is very good because of that, and because also next time we can just open attack instead of develop. With the Nila that we play here, right? As long as the Methodical doesn't have lethal, which I don't think he does. See, so yeah, this Tide Dancer goes in front of this Jax, and this Mariner goes in front of this. Yeah, we can't press OK. We have to block. Yeah. So yeah, going down to 7. Sorry, taking 3 damage. Neela is gonna be flipped in our next attack token. I am guessing Methodical is gonna use the refreshment here to go up to 8 HP.
Yeah, and when he goes up to 8 HP, he will still be threatened to be killed on the open. If he puts the pot on Jax, then he will technically be alive, only going down to a couple HP.
All right, MTech is opting to go for the Tide Dancer line next turn, trying to proc it and win the game through using its ability to give the entire board the Brash on +2/+0. Obviously, with Caster Vision, we know that this is not gonna go very favorably because there is a Buried in Ice. Not 100% sure if it's the wrong or if it's the right play. What do you think, Card Gamer? Actually, this is like a very difficult spot. I don't know what I would do.
I think it works out when you consider how you play around freeze and your access to like multiple Nihilus next turn, right? Because if he plays Buried, he can play Buried in Ice and the refreshment, but like you actually have the ability to fork freeze now, right?
Do you have the ability to play double? You don't have the ability to play double Nihilus. You said multiple Nihilus. I don't think you can. Yeah, you can't, but it's still not bad because this Jax does end up getting removed, right? Because you will swing here, you'll bring this Jax down to Howling Gale range through the Sky Splitter.
No, what I mean, right, is you have this Nyla whip, a combo with the Gale to remove the Jax to get the Nyla through, right?
Ah,
So
I see.
Play the boat and then swing like.
Yeah. I see what you mean. I completely missed this line. This is just lethal, right?
Yeah, it should be, because your opponent's tapped out, and then this Gale should kill, and then Nyla. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, okay. This was a pretty intense game. I think MTech played this pretty well. I think Methodical played this pretty well as well. Could have easily won the game with an Ornn. Unfortunately, just didn't end up hitting it. Maybe could have found a win there somewhere else as well. But we see the text that MTech opted for paying off. And I know you have a lot to say about Tide Dancer, Card Gamer, so you can just boast about that.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, Tide Dancer, good card, wins your losing matchups. And we won that matchup. Tide Dancer drew Nihilus. Drew Tide Dancer for a Spirit, and nice. Just saying.
Yeah, definitely, like, regardless of what your opinion is on what the right version of Janna Neela is, I think it's very easy to tell from watching this game that Sunken Temple would have had a much more uncontrolled impact on the game. So, Tide Dancer just having that insurance, being able to stabilize the board and apply counter pressure, just put in a lot of work that game. It was good to see.
And then MTech is drawing a really strong curve. Omen Hawk is, it sounds silly, but it's like honestly the best card in Overwhelm. Like when you play Omen Hawk on 1 compared to when you don't, this deck is like night and day. And then also having some pretty well statted units to curve into on 3 and 4 as well is really powerful. If these Omen Hawks draw into 2-drops, it's very easy for MTech to start running away with the game.
Yeah, I have a friend that tells me that the way you mulligan for this deck is you just hard mull for Omen Hawk. I always think he's joking, but I think he's not. Which, I don't know if that means this deck is good or bad, but it does speak to its reliance on Omen Hawk, for sure.
And
oh wow,
MTech is drops a very strong position to be in.
MTech is just the most talented person alive, man. Look at this. 4-3 toss speaker right off the top. Obviously, this Jax still gets to swing. And also, looking at Methodical's hand, Jax spell is really good in this matchup. Like, really, really good in this matchup.
Yeah, Jax spell is going to be extremely oppressive. Especially if we decide to curve into 3-drop. But if we elect to go for a line where we hold up this protection spell by going 1-drop...
No, we're supposed to... No, Card Gamer, we're supposed to not play this 3-drop because we're just going to play 3-drop next turn and then Battle Fury on 5.
I think that makes sense.
Like, I'm assuming that's what's going to happen. Like, I think there is a good chance we get put in a spot here where Elixir of Iron is good, and we don't play it because we want all of our mana for the next 2 turns. Right, we see Blacksmith come down. This means that it's very likely for these units to just get in. and apply some decent pressure. I'm curious to see how Methodical is going to end up blocking here. Like, does he sack the Jax? Does he not? Depending on how Methodical blocks here, the game can change completely. Yeah, like this flips the game, right? Almost. Okay, we end up playing the Elixir of Iron, so we tap under the Iron Ballista Battle Fury, but we keep this Tusk Speaker on the board, which means that we can just Battle Fury the Tusk Speaker.
Yeah, that is an option, but it does play a bit into freeze, and our opponent's HP is a bit high. I think when our opponent takes that block, it makes sense to play the game a bit slower.
Yeah, also top decking the second Tusk Speaker here is very nice. Like, very, very nice, actually. I'm not looking like, not necessarily in the driver's seat, but he is applying the meaningful pressure that this deck needs to apply.
That being said, if Methodical finds a way to stabilize this game, it will get very scary, because I do believe Jaxorn will get a bit bigger than Overwhelm, and they have better access to cards like Freeze. But
yeah, I think like Emtek is gonna need his spells, like Decisive Maneuver and whatnot.
I'm also a big fan of the Combat Cook developed this turn, giving you the flexibility to double unit next turn, if you so choose.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. We're probably going to develop here. Yeah, it's just like you can't be too passive and open attack with this deck in this matchup, because as you said, the longer the game goes, Jackson is just going to go a little bit bigger, and that's going to be a big problem. So we need to just try to apply pressure from turn to turn as much as we can.
Yeah, and it looks like we are attempting to do that. Now, the interesting decision here is which unit we decide to go for, because the Tusk Speaker does push a lot more effectively on the board, but it does give up some cards to represent, which, granted, on a 2-card hand, your opponent probably isn't playing around much, but representing cards like Sky Splitter, being able to re-equip an equipment can definitely be relevant in some situations.
Yeah, and also another thing about developing the Tusk Speaker instead of the Sabo is that if we do full swing, Methodical has the option to get rid of all of our overwhelm units, and that is important. Like, sometimes in this deck, because of the spells that you play, like Battle Fury and Decisive Maneuver, preserving as many overwhelm units as possible on the board is a relevant decision point.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's very easy for, like you were saying, cards like Battle Fury and Decisive Maneuver to rot away in your hand if you don't have access to Overwhelm. Like,
exactly.
Overwhelm is sort of our equipment, if you were like to compare this to Jaxorn, right? Whereas like Jaxorn can't really play the game without equipment, we really need Overwhelm because our finishers are so reliant on it.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way of putting it. Like, here, Mtex has basically put himself in a position where it's like, I applied a little bit more pressure this turn because my Tusk Speaker swung in instead of my Saboteur, which is a little bit better because I think the Saboteur is a 2-1, not a 3-2. If I'm wrong, I'm just a bozo.
It should be a 2-1.
But then, consequentially, here, we are in this spot where this is kind of a showcase of one of Overwhelm's weaknesses. It's like if you go for this kind of line, you are very reliant on specific top decks. Like, you really need Saurian here. You really need Gnar, Darius. It becomes a game of basically like, I have set up this game plan, and now I just need to trust my deck to hit it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not always the best situation to be in. That being said, Methodical is also looking a bit light in the win con department, but Jax is a lot better than anything Mtux has right now, and the Buried in Ice does give Methodical quite the ability to stall. On top of, he also has I believe it's the Explorer's Blunder in hand to remove the Overwhelm keyword for 2 turns.
I'm guessing Mtux is gonna full swing here and hope that Methodical leaves a blocker open, leaves an attacker open.
Yeah, I would imagine that is the ideal.
Okay, we don't end up doing that, and I think that's like, I don't know if that's correct or not, to be honest. You might be in a position where you kind of have to hope that your opponent messes up.
Yeah, that is fair, but it does seem a little bit telegraphed when you swing like that. So
Oh, for sure.
in a
Yeah, yeah.
tournament, I understand just saying I'm going to draw the overwhelm. You're not really going to have answers, but we do know they have the blunder, and their board is getting scary big. Just
The blunder is the main reason. The blunder is the main reason I was speaking to that, by the way, because like it turns off the overwhelm top deck out, right?
Yeah.
And here, Jax is gonna flip. It's at 7 out of 16, so this is a pretty.
Jax is going to get big. Getting
Yeah, really
from
big.
this flip.
Yeah, becomes a 9-8, I believe. No, 8-7. Yeah, there we go.
Mm-hmm. So putting a 2-turn clock on, not considering this freeze, but I don't know if we're really allowed to use a freeze like that.
It just looks like a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation for MTech here, because you just don't have the mana, even if you top deck the overall unit here, even if there was no blunder. Ruthless Raider was ideally actually probably one of the best ones that you could have drawn here. But also, like, it's not even enough damage if the Battle Fury connects throw a blocker, is it? Like,
yeah, I mean, you can put it gets blundered, you can put the reel on it, you can try and swing through, but it's gonna be hard.
I think, so, like, what you can do here... Nah, it doesn't matter because of buried, right?
Yeah, you can, you use the Battle Fury here, or you swing here, they can take this.
I mean, here Methonica should just take it and play Buried on Ice. But I'm not 100% sure if they're going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you block here, it's still fine. MTech is going to play Battle Fury here. And Methonica is probably going to bury the Ice and open attack. If they don't draw a unit, if they draw a unit, they're going to develop the unit.
I don't think you're supposed to open attack. You're probably usually developing, but I can see...
If you draw a development, yeah.
Because the other thing about Buried in Ice, right, is Explorer's Blunder resets on turn end, so when they're in the Buried in Ice, they won't actually see a turn end. So it'll still be...
that's a very good point.
When it comes out.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, actually. Yeah. I completely missed that. Yeah, anyway, Methodical opts to do this instead, which, I mean, it makes sense. We do see Darius. It's not flipped yet, which is not great. At this stage of the game, you would ideally want Darius to be flipped. Castaway comes down, just applying more pressure. I believe this Darius will...
game because...
Yeah, this is just lethal.
The Buried. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the flash freeze is not enough to survive. Yeah, so we see Methodical take it. The overall deck, it was a decent start by MTech by all means, but it's a combination of not being able to snowball properly afterwards, and also Jaxhorn being a bit of a rough matchup, right? Because as you said, it gets a little bit bigger, has a little bit better defensive tools in the matchup. Quick attack is a really broken keyword in these kinds of mid-range metas, so we just saw that in action. The Jax kind of carried, very good champion. So with that being said, Methodical gets the win. The set's now tied 1-1, and we're going to be watching an overwhelm meta now.
Yeah, this will definitely be an exciting one to see how it comes down to who is the better overwhelm champion. One small Yordle or one angry man.
I like how you said which one is the best overwhelm champion, and you picked the worst champion of the two in both decks.
Yeah. Intentionally.
Yeah, surely it was intentional. Yeah.
Darius Slander will not be will not be had here, okay? But
I really like how this layout is on the board right now, by the way. Like, can you see this diamond in the middle?
Yeah.
Bro, a double skip?
WTF, 2 skips?
Yeah, what the hell is going on here?
Alright, so Skip did take Saurion. We did chip in for one with Skip. We're applying some pressure. There's like a tough speaker going down. I think we're also playing a Sabo that's going to crack in. I'm not sure if there's a Yuumi in hand. If there is a Yuumi in hand, it's going to shut down Mtux's attack. If not, Mtux will probably have a pretty strong attack this turn.
If Mtux has the attack token, which we cannot confirm nor deny.
No. We saw skip attack last turn, so we know Mtux has the attack token. Okay,
True.
so we see a Pouty Poro in response. I imagine on the side of Methodical, you're hoping to throw a Bone Club down. Maybe we're seeing like a Sky Splitter come down onto this Poro.
Alright. Given these mana points, I don't see a reason for... Like, I guess the Saboteur walks into base 3, but aren't you okay with that?
You probably are. I guess the scarier thing is like when they don't pastry.
Yeah, no pastry is scarier, but I think if they don't pastry, you can consider just swinging with the 2 drops only, right?
Yeah, I mean, you might be supposed to swing as well because, like, I think you are happy if they Sky Splitter unless they draw into specifically Yuumi. But it's an interesting spot. One thing from playing against this Yuumi deck, which I did a little bit practicing for opens, is, and like we said earlier, putting them on a certain hand range and like trying to play around it is really tricky and really important because they have a lot of different speeds of clock and tools to interact with you depending on what their hand looks like.
Yeah, you also need to acknowledge that like you're playing against a combo deck. You're playing against a deck that from the beginning of the game should be thinking of, okay, which turn am I lethaling my opponent? And the more pressure you apply, the more mana your opponent's gonna have to spend trying to stabilize. And not stabilize, but survive without like just completely just trying to ignore you, right? And when you go for the Saboteur development, that's what you're doing. You're saying I'm applying more pressure, and yeah, sure, okay, you get to play this like Inner Beast to get 2 trades and only the speaker connects, right? But maybe this Inner Beast is 2 mana that Methodical doesn't actually want to spend, but is forced to cope with the pressure.
Yeah, and speaking of the pressure, Methodical doesn't have very effective tools to actually relieve that. We do have a 3 Sisters, which isn't bad, but we don't actually have effective ways to buff up our units. We have the Stance Swap, but we're really looking for a card like Yuumi with how our mana points lined up this turn, and not having that is going to put us under a lot of pressure, especially considering the Saurian is actually going to be drawing cards for Mtux on top of putting a huge overwhelm body on the board.
Yeah, something that's like worth mentioning in general when it comes to this Fizz Yuumi deck is that it does have a bit of an over-reliance on Yuumi and Bone Club. Like, it's really difficult to win the game when you draw neither. Sometimes only Battle Fury does the job, but like you need that like payoff essentially, and that payoff is constituted in the form of permanent buffs on these units, so that you don't end up spending mana every turn trying to apply more and more pressure. And also in some matchups, this is not one of them, but in some matchups, you really need specifically Fizz. So like the deck runs into like wrong half of deck issues, has a bit of a consistency problem. It's a little difficult to like play this deck on ladder is basically what I'm saying, right? It's a similar concept of like consistency is not really there. Your matchups are pretty polarizing and you're sometimes reliant on a little too many cards in one match.
Fizz is at 2, right? So we don't have a way to ever win this game, I don't think.
Fizz is at 2.
Like 2 level up progress, because if he's at 3, we can Elixir of Iron and then Point Face and then like Battle Fury and then get Fizz up to 13 because of the level. But if Fizz is at 2, I think we're just always dead next turn.
We've got to play for it though, right? Because we can draw into Harsh.
Oh, Fizz is at 3. Fizz is at 3, right?
3,
So
okay.
I think if we had a line, if we played Elixir and blocked the 3/3, and then we played like Pastry Face, right? Because we would be at 8 mana this turn, and then if we top deck the Battle Fury, which we don't end up seeing, but I think that was the line.
Yeah, that does check out. It's a little difficult for me to walk through all of that, but I think it did check out. And now I think it's going to be really difficult for Mtech not to be able to show lethal here.
Yeah.
We'll
Even
see how it
without
goes.
Harsh.
Yeah,
Well, I
like
guess
even Harsh plus 3 Sisters.
It removes 3. We can block. We technically would get there, I think, but it's very, very tight.
Yeah, and Mtech also has a lot of top decks that beat it, right?
Yeah. like decisive maneuver. Three Sisters should, I believe. I think Battle Fury does, depending on how MTux plays the following turn.
Yeah, Methodical really just going through the motions here, trying to figure out what his out is, because he is definitely on the back foot here. As said previously, no permanent buffs on this Fizz, and just being it just makes it really difficult for this deck to actually clock their opponent properly.
Yeah, and I think one thing worth noting is, I don't think it was to any fault of Methodical. I think Methodical has played some very, very strong games, and just the nature of the lineup he brought, there's a little bit of fail rate in there, and like the reliance on Bone Club and Yuumi. When you don't hit, like in a game like this, it's just really, really tricky to get there. Like we saw, the Battle Fury could have maybe pulled it out, but just not quite getting the cards he needed. But a very strong showing and putting his team in a very, very good position.
I mean, he does quite literally still get there if he top decks Harsh Winds. MTech's not playing Saboteur because he's playing for the Battle Fury top deck, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I believe so.
Let's see. So, Chum the Waters comes down to get one more blocker. We're gonna play a Saboteur maybe now that there's one more blocker. Might still be something that MTech is considering. Okay, we end up passing regardless. Let's see what
he
they're
wants to develop the Saurian if he doesn't.
Oh, MTech, you are just a genius.
Dirty dog, you.
You are just a genius. Wow. And can Methodical press OK before getting lethal to play around Battle Fury?
Not sure if that's how that one works.
No, what I mean is, like, can he somehow not take more than 5? Like, if you know.
Yeah, I don't think that's possible.
Yeah, I don't think that's possible. I was just thinking about it in case he would be able to live, because that's the only way. But no, it looks like this Three Sisters is being forced. This Three Sisters is actually not even enough, is it? No. Yeah, it's not even enough. So we don't even end up needing to play the Battle Fury. Thonica's gonna press OK. Oh no, there's actually a way to go to 4. Okay, so this Battle Fury does end up winning the game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Just going through the motions. This Battle Fury slammed by MTech should be able to wrap the game. I guess we're thinking about which target, which is a fair thing to think about. It's still possible for Methodical to have things. But that concludes this set. So MTech with some hope for Maokai Saplings. Wrapping it up with a 2-1 victory against Methodical. Methodical going out with a 2-1 overall score. Something not to be ashamed of. I think it was a very good showing, and it was a very decent lineup into what Maokai Sapling was able to bring. We see Jana Nila, the deck that Methodical was trying to counter with his lineup, being able to withstand that. But regardless, it was a great showing. MTux is now going to need to try and reverse sweep, which means that there are still 2 more players from Trundle's Trolls that he will need to beat. It's either going to be Alexander or Drissoth coming up next. We'll be taking it to a break, and we will be back with some more Runeterra. This one will be exciting, guys. Stay tuned. Welcome back, guys. We are now in set number 4 of Maokai Sapling against Trundle Trolls. And last set, we saw MTech stopping the full sweep from Methodical. And now it's on him to sweep for his team because he's the only player left. Card Gamer, you remember the Methodical versus Jinden set? We are about to see the equivalent of that with opposite sides.
Yeah, about to see the flip side of it. So like you said, MTux came out big, gave Methodical his first loss in the league, so big shot MTux, but like you're saying, he has a really, really difficult matchup up against Alexander. We were kind of talking a little bit about the meta triangle earlier. MTux kind of flexes into these decks that kind of play in this Demacia zone, right? We'll call it the Demacia zone. And plus John and Isla. And Alex, he has an anti-Demacia lineup. And he'll just ban John and Isla. So it'll be tricky, but running back through MTux decks again, we see, like we mentioned, John and Isla. We cut out the temples on this version, on the 2 Tide Dancer, 2 Helmsman as our top end, also playing Vikrash to help keep that card draw going without the temple. Moving on from there, we have our, we'll call them Demacia decks.
Yeah, that's Galio, which we have gone through the most out of any other deck tonight because it's been so popular and it's been eating so many bans. The deck speaks for itself, honestly, and whenever we see it play, we completely understand why this is happening. However, this will be a set where I believe this deck is going to get left open and its weaknesses might get exposed, so we'll see how that goes. And his last deck is Darius Nar. Bonk.
Yeah, Bonk. If you were with us just a few minutes ago, you saw MTux come in clutch on this deck, but you also saw some of the issues it has. When this deck works out, when things line up, it's very good, but it can definitely be prey to some awkward.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Alexander, we can see the region combinations down. There are some hits today. So we have, first of all, Nora Heimerdinger, which I guess is now Heimerdinger's deck of choice, with Jace no longer being that good considering the nerfs that we saw in the last patch. But Heimer Nora still holding its own weight. It's got the SI tools, just like how Ash SI does in the games we saw previously. It's got the Quietus, it's got the Soul Harvest. In this case, we are playing Vengeance, and it's also got Ruination. Other than that, it's just got a bunch of chump blockers, and the only really unique thing about this list is there is 2 copies of Skip, which usually you don't see in Control Shells.
Yeah, the Skip is really interesting. I'd be very curious to hear why Alex decided to include that in his deck. Alex is a very strong control player. I would consider this like one of his strongest archetypes, so I'm sure he has a good reason for it, but I'm just very curious as to why.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair to say. Moving on, we have yes, I don't actually know if I can give this deck the introduction that it deserves. Like, I don't think there are enough words in the English language to describe the giga chadness you need to have.
I like to call this deck hater pile.
Yeah, I think hater pile is a good word for it. Yo, I'm a big fan of Thread the Needle. That has nothing to do with my obsession with Gwen. Don't worry about it.
Thread the Needle is a hot tech, but essentially this deck, we're killing everything that touches the board. We're killing even our stuff that touches the board, which is why we have the Undying. We have like the Halberd for some extra top end. And yeah, like, it's just a hater deck, man. Like, nothing's allowed to exist.
I wanna see a Tarosh lethal, just for all my selfish reasons. Like, no other.
A Tarosh making like a bunch of like 9/9 Undyings. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, and then we've got Shenjie 4, which is a generic counter deck. But in the counter anti-meta lineup, Shenjie 4 is typically supposed to be there. One thing to say about this Shenjie 4 list, I suppose, is that we're a little less greedy. Like, most Shenjie 4 lists play a lot more top end between J3, Sacred Protector, and Sinon. Here we're only playing 2. Most people play 3 at least and go up to 5 of these 3 cards. And there is also 1 Gentleman's Duel, which isn't a common thing. But otherwise, it's a pretty standard-ish Shenjie 4 deck. Yeah. It's gonna hold its own weight. The only thing all of these decks have is consistency. If they hit, they'll do very well into MTech, and if they don't, it might give MTech the opener.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. One last thing to note about this Shen deck as well is there is 1 copy of Syncopation. which can definitely do some cheeky things and is definitely a pain to play around, especially when you have some of the Greenglade Caretaker set up on the board. But going into the pick and ban hash, what are you thinking about for each side? I think it's pretty clear. We already kind of discussed it. Alexander kind of has to ban this John and Nyla deck, but on the side of MTux, what is he thinking?
Honestly, it's a really difficult decision. Like, I think you're likely supposed to leave up Nasus Senna. I would say you probably ban Nora Heimer, but it's doomed. It's rough. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky position to be in. I think I agree with you that you're probably supposed to play into the Nasus Senna, but I'm kind of with you. I don't think I could tell you off of just the theory, looking into this spread. I am not that familiar. It might be Shen, but I'm not sure. It's really tricky.
I think there are like actual game plans with MTux decks into Shen, whereas into SI, if they hit, you just lose. Like, you can beat Shen if they hit sometimes, I think. But we see MTux opting to go for the Shen J4 ban, which, I mean, you are triple unfavored here, and you're just banning the deck with the highest power level. I'm not gonna criticize that. Like, it is really, really rough here. It's gonna rely on MTech having really tight play, and Alexander potentially on top of that having to Laurel a little bit.
Yeah, but it's definitely something that can happen. I think one thing that happens a lot in Aegis is people tend to bring some decks that have the ability to low roll. So if there's ever a tournament you need someone to low roll in, Aegis is not, the worst one for that to be the case. But definitely not the position you want to be in, especially when, you're fighting for your life in the tournament like MTux is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is going to be like again, as said previously, like MTech is on a either you sweep the entire team or you don't and you are out. Like, if Alexander wins this set, which is really in big favor of him in paper, MTech is out. The team is out, Maokai Saplings, and it's just over for them. So it's really high pressure, and honestly, all you can do in moments like these is just hope that things go your way.
Mm-hmm. And when we look at the opening hands, it looks like both players are pretty happy with the hands they've gotten. MTux with some very high quality units. The fact that Snar is a bit vulnerable to Soul Harvest and Hate Spike isn't ideal, but if we draw into some tricks, that'll be pretty good. Meanwhile, on the side of Alexander, you have some filtering early, some early kill spells. You also have your Undying TA or Engine and like a potential win con going. And you also have an Explorer, which is going to be so valuable. Like we saw from when Methodical was playing, the Blunder in this matchup it does a lot.
Yeah, like the way to combat the blunder is usually you need to just go wide enough for it to not end up mattering on the overall units, but it's difficult because it's not something that Nardaris can consistently do, and even when it does, is still gonna have some form of impact. The blunder, it's difficult to make it a complete blank. The other thing that I was also gonna say is that this Nasus Senna deck, like once your opponent plays Senna, there are no decision points anymore. Like, you just need to kind of jam and hope that they don't have the Castigate or the Ruination or whatever removal spell it is.
Yeah, your ability to play around actions becomes very limited, right? Because the Senna does a lot in this deck in terms of turning on their removal points. And the Darkness, having a little bit of extra fodder and being able to pick off certain size units is not irrelevant either. Don't get me wrong, especially if Senna flips and you get the discount. But like you were saying, yeah, your ability to play around actions is almost non-existent, and you really just have to try to start forking mana, and if you can't do that, like you were saying, you kind of just have to pray.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the hit spike on the Gnar, by the way, acknowledging that it's like turning off Saria instead of like one more damage off the Ballista. I think that makes a lot of sense. So now MTech is, with the combat cook, maybe that changes, but I was thinking you would go 3+2. Yeah, you're going to go 3+2 here. It's probably going to get met by another Armed Acquisition or potentially a Spirit Leech to get some draw in, but Alexander's hand right now is just shy of like one Castigate to make the game really hard for MTech.
Yeah, that being said though, if MTux is able to cash in now and then transition to Darius game plan, like The Blunders stall out of it, but Alex isn't actually happy about dealing with the Darius.
The thing is, like, the blunder is good and all, but the blunder is only good if you have blockers. And blockers is not something that there is an abundance of in this Nasus Senna deck.
Yeah, your main unit is Undying, which, as we can all see, cannot block.
Now, you can read card gamer. I am a card gamer. I can't read.
I
Oh, wait.
can't read. I just know what the symbol means.
Ah, yes, okay. I mean, actually, it doesn't even say it on the card, right? When you hover over it.
I think it does. Some of it
I think you have to
block. I don't know if Undying does.
Okay, I think you might have to hover on the X. Yeah, not 100% sure. Anyway, Senna comes down, and now I think the fear of God is instilled onto MTech, and it's like, well, I hope I hope I open attack and they don't have their fast Castigate or their fast Ruination or their fast, I guess that's it in this list. Not anything else.
Dawning Shadow jump scare.
Oh yeah, Dawning Shadow, that's true. Of course you wouldn't forget about that card game. To be fair though, like, no Nasus, pretty clunky-ish hand from Alexander. MTech might actually be able to get there.
Yeah, he can definitely steal this game out. The fact that Alex is on 6 gives him a lot of... Not a lot, but it definitely gives him a good bit more leeway to be able to sneak out some lethals. The Deny will definitely do a bit to stop the little bit of cheeky burnout that this deck will sometimes get with, like, Pirouettes or Tusk Speakers or Gnar. But, like you were saying, we're starting to get backed up on mana and cards, which is a very scary spot to be in as these Nasus-style decks.
Yeah, that being said though, like, if Alexander survives this swing, all he needs is to eventually draw an Nasus. If we're not seeing Nasus, we're pretty sad though. Okay, MTech is gonna full swing here. I think this hate spike is the only reason Alexander stays alive. Yeah, we have to do this, and we have to hit spike the Spirit Leech into the Dust Speaker. Otherwise, we're...
Yeah, and then we take one, and we're just a bit sad. But like you were saying, we are pretty vulnerable to just the wideness of this board, even with the blunders. And now that the Senna's gone, our ability to withstand these open attacks, especially from wide boards, is very limited.
Yeah, I think still Alexander is only one Nasus away from completely stabilizing pretty much, because Nasus just shuts off Overwhelm so well. But if we go to 1 HP here, it does get significantly more difficult. And I can't help but think that maybe, given how low you are on blockers, you were supposed to go for refreshments, not blunder.
That might be the case. I'm not sure.
I mean,
oh, what if we blunder our 5/5 so he can block?
Wait, is Naganeka 8 mana?
Yeah, Naganeka is 8 mana.
Holy. We're just gonna
The
play
only
Naganeka.
Darkins that aren't 8 mana are Jaral, Zalani, and Pra.
Yeah, that's 3 of them, card gamer. That's not only.
Yeah, well, 3 of 7.
There's more than 7. 10.
10. There's 7 that are 8 mana.
Yeah. Well, we ended up playing Gnar instead, which is not something I dislike, because the idea here is just Pokestick, I think.
Yeah.
How funny is it that if we open attack, it's just lethal? Okay, we end up
They
playing
never
Gnar.
expect the Gnar open on turn 9 into...
Oh wait, this is a decimate line. This is a decimate line, isn't it? Like, we played this Darius because we wanted to keep this decimate open, and yeah, Alexander's hand is just too clunky. Okay, so we see, funnily enough, 2 players bringing SI, right? And it's starting pretty rocky for both of them, because like you are hitting the right matchups, but you're also playing pretty low power decks.
Yeah, definitely playing decks that are below the bar on the power level. And they have some clunkiness issues, like they can get backed up on mana, and we're really seeing it get punished here. Granted, these SI decks are not nearly as strong against the Darius Gnar compared to the Galio deck. These SI decks really exist to prey on Galio. The Shen deck had a pretty solid matchup into the Overwhelm, but the SI deck isn't quite as good. But this is where the SI decks are really supposed to shine, and It's really going to have to, because Alex needs to 2-0 MTux if he wants to take it home for him and his trolls.
Yeah, so now we're gonna basically see if Galio can stand the test of the SI decks. It did stand that test with Methodical against Jinden earlier today. Let's see if MTX can return the favor and equalize the set.
Yeah, MTux is in a solid spot. Having 2 chances is pretty good, but you do not like to really see a position like this on the side of MTux, where your opponent has access to a lot of portal units.
Yeah, this is also something I was talking to MTech about earlier today, where I was like, I think, given the position Galio is in the like BO3 meta right now, it might have actually been a decent call to go for Udyr instead of Garen or Jarvan, because Udyr helps a lot more than the other cards in the SI matchups.
Just the ability of the stances to create a lot of really difficult threats that are must answers.
Yeah. Like, the stances are really good, and then also, like, it taxes removal in a way that, like, eventually your opponent runs out of vengeances.
Oh my, that Sleepy Dupes is gonna be a massive issue to deal with.
Yeah, Alexander's got, like, a really, really good hand, and this is the thing that, like, made me... This was, like, when I was thinking of Intux's ban, this is what made me lean Nora Heimer. Is I can see Shen J4 brick, I can see Senna Nasus brick. Nora Heimer bricking is not really a concept.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
you just have so many cards that are filler, right? You have a lot of repetitive cards in comparison to the other decks.
Yeah, and you don't, like, I think often with at least comparing Heimer Nora with the other SI decks that beat Galio. The other SI decks that beat Galio, they're like, okay, you need to draw Soul Harvest, you need to draw Quietus. Of course, you play a lot of these cards, but you still need to draw them. Nora Heimer doesn't. Nora Heimer just needs to play. Nora Heimer just needs to draw anything, because the deck is either removal or chump blockers. So it's just gonna chump everything if it doesn't draw this removal.
And we don't have the tools that are super happy to deal with their engines, right? So it isn't like we're happy when they're drawing engines instead of those cards.
No, in fact, actually, we can't deal with their engines, because they're, like, when they go for, like, the portal game plan, they are gonna be, like, swarming the board. And going wide against the Galio, which is a deck that's on, like, 1 unit per turn, can be really high pressure.
Yeah, especially when your Heimerdinger is fearsome and has 5 HP. How's that guy ever gonna die?
We would be trying a lot harder than we would like to kill this Heimer. That's the way I would put it.
We'll be okay right now because of this Garen, but yeah, otherwise.
I mean, we still, I guess.
Because there's no vengeance in hand, we really get by, but...
Yeah, I guess we get a decent amount of pressure in this turn, but I still think that, like, Alex just plays a Portal Palooza here and he's completely chilling.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that's likely the line. Maybe you end up pointing Pytos somewhere, but...
Or opting for Conchologist instead, not something I dislike. I might have glimpsed a formal invitation there off of the Conchologist, and I would have thought about that a little longer, because Pythos, while being, like, the most generically correct pick, because, like, you main deck the card, so it's surely going to be good, it's not that insane into Formidables, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it is a pretty low value card generally against Formidables. So I kind of agree that I think there was maybe some more utility in some of the other picks, but Pythos is a pretty generically good card, so it's hard to really go wrong with it.
Yeah, we see the portals just coming in, and also Ruination. Yeah, Ruination is a very, very, very good card here. Like, you see Alexander, like, he has a board, so you're thinking, okay, Ruination is, like, even for both players, but the answer is that just not true, because one of these players is far, far, far more capable of refueling the board than the other. And
yeah, as we can see in the top right, Alexander with still 2 portals in his deck, just the capability to refuel his board is just much higher than Umtuk's.
Yeah, like, this is just completely dominant position for Alexander, in my opinion. not necessarily a game that's gonna end quickly, because again, Noraheimer needs some time to power through, as do all of these side decks, because that's just a common pattern with the region right now. There's not really that many win conditions, not really that easy to finish the game. Atrocity is gone, right? It's not in the game. It's not in standard anymore. So it will take some time, but I do think Alexander with the 2 portals, with the Ruination in hand, it's difficult for MTech to actually find the winning chances here.
Yeah, especially if the Ruination just ends up getting ripped next turn. It's going to be a really hard position to fight out of.
Barrier, Megalol. Yeah, we go Naganeka, we rip Ruination here, and the game just ends.
I would imagine that is the play pattern.
Ends is a little bit facetious, I guess, but I'm like Alex has one more portal in deck, a lot more cards in hand. MTech has a CS which does nothing without a board and is basically on top decks.
Yeah, very, very rough position to be in, especially considering that's the only Ruination that Alexander actually plays in his deck.
I am now the formidable deck, says Alexander as he top decks his second copy of Heimerdinger.
His formidable's bigger than ours. That's so messed up.
Yeah, like, you just develop the Heimer, right, Shirley? Oh, it's the Hallowed stack. The relevant Hallowed stack.
Yeah, I would think you probably go Heimer first, but I don't think it really matters what you're doing on the side of Alexander. And yeah, MTux kind of agrees. I'm just electing to go to the next game, save a bit of mental, and just, say it's fine. Nasus Senate is not a good deck, and we will beat it.
Yeah, so now we gotta see how this Nasus Senate deck is gonna perform. Noraheimer getting the win that it was honestly pretty inevitably going to get. The deck just into Galio, I think it's the most reliable SI deck into Galio, because it just has such a diversified way of dealing with Galio's ways of beating these decks. It doesn't really need the removal, it can just chump block forever, and if it can't chump block forever, it's gonna use removal, because what else are you gonna draw? That's your entire deck.
Yep. Completely agree. But going into this game, it seems like MTux has a pretty okay hand. You don't have the formidables you want, but the draw can be pretty annoying for the opponent to deal with, and the sculptors can definitely apply a lot of pressure, demanding cards like Quietus to come out.
One thing I will say is that, looking at Alexander's hand, this is already much better than the first game, because there is a Nasus. And, Nasus in these matchups is really, really important. I guess that's the word I would use. It's important, because you end up having to use mana removing stuff way too much when you don't have Nasus. But when you have Nasus, he just holds the fort really well. And also, in this matchup, he has the most broken keyword in Legends of Runeterra.
Yeah, the fearsome keyword is very oppressive against the formidable deck. Cannot deny that.
I wonder why.
Clueless.
To be fair, MTech doesn't really have any formidables in hand right now, but that's also not great for him. I don't think MTech's particularly happy going Sculptor, Badger Bear next turn, but it's not really
draw to pressure their X4 or their 4Xs.
Yeah, that's also valid. Joral is probably better than Badger Bear.
Not the ideal position to be in, especially because we're probably going to end up having to play pretty hard into this Castigate at some point.
Yeah, we opt for the open instead of the develop, because this develop is really bad into Castigate, which I guess, I don't have an issue with that. I just think, the way this ends up scaling is, very largely in favor of Alex.
Yeah, because we're going to have to play into the Castigate at some point, likely, due to the fact we have the CS in hand, which is our, main win con at the moment.
Yeah, at some point we're gonna have to spend 8 mana. Ideally, Alexander never gives us a good spot to use that 8 mana, because if he does, we do end up applying meaningful pressure, but if he doesn't, we just gets responded by with a Castigate. Castigate, there's no Senna on the board. And from there, it's gonna have a very similar impact to the Ruination we saw last game, where it's MTech runs out of cards, And the difference here is Alexander won't have units to refill the board nearly as much, but he's just gonna play a big fat Nasus and move on with life.
Yeah, when you play a Nasus in that spot, it's going to be very, very difficult for your opponent to take over the board. Even though Nasus, like, the minus effect on his flip may not do as much in this matchup, he will end the game much, much quicker, and he still isn't a threat you can really get through.
Yeah, I really like this pass by MTech, just acknowledging that, like, these side decks are clunky. They do need to spend mana because otherwise they get a little bit forked down the road. But also, like, I think Alexander is also pretty happy just playing the Soul Harvest here and moving on with life. Like, it's a really hard spot for MTech to find a win from, in my opinion.
Yeah, a very, very tricky spot. There's a pretty reasonable hand on the side from Alexander, and from MTech, you're almost just like praying your opponent makes a mistake.
Yeah, I think that's probably your only way out. The Spirit Leech drawing into another Nasus, which is just, like, it's pretty much sealing the deal here because Nasus is just so hard to deal with and he's inevitably going to come down. And once he inevitably comes down,
potentially a big opening on this turn though with how things played out, but drawing into the Piercing Darkness as well is very just like, it's a lot for MTux to try and push through, you know?
Yeah, I think this is like the game has gotten into a state that is just really, really, really difficult for MTech to pull out from. Not really applying any much meaningful pressure. Like I don't like the CS doesn't even do anything. We end up playing Nasus here. So
you just have to CS here as MTech and trade with this Nasus and then push in a few damage, or
we're opting against it, but it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's how much mana do we have? We have 7 plus 3 from Alex's side, which is 10. Sorry, I don't know how we got to 7 plus 3 for me to figure that out. Anyway, we have 10 mana, so we could consider doing like a Siphoning Strike into developing some units.
Yeah, Alex is just trying to figure out like what's the most efficient way to end the game, or if he's even supposed to try and end the game, or if that's just bait. Like, is trying to end the game gonna walk him into a loss?
Yeah, that's a very important concept to understand with control. Like, you are very much not the beat down until you really have to be.
Yeah. Because when you make a decision like this as the side of Alex, you have to be very, very careful that you aren't in a position to get punished by like increasing your pressure for a turn, right? Because this is the first time in a while you've actually taken yourself off of Castigate when your opponents had a lot of mana to try and do something.
Yeah, and I mean, with MTech tapping under CS mana, I think Alex is completely in the clear. Although, not going to be able to do much because of their hand texture. Still, though, they can swing with this Nasus, guarantees the flip. And the flip, as mentioned, like into this board especially, because there are no formidables here, so the -1, -0 actually is meaningful. It's gonna put in work, and it's gonna hold the fort really well. Makes it really, really hard for MTech to actually push through, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is going to do a lot right here, like you're saying, because now the threat of the attack on the open isn't pushing lethal, which, you know, that's a pretty meaningful distinction for the side of Alexander. Like, it's going to take quite a bit of power and tricks for MTux to change that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, really big and a very good thing to mention. Honestly, let me think of top decks that MTech can have here. He doesn't play J4, does he? He doesn't play J4.
No. This is a 3 Garen 2 Galio list.
So it's not J4. Yeah, I think... Yeah, okay, I mean, we draw Sculptor, and then, yeah, it's met by Vengeance. So even if we drew, like, some miraculous out, the Vengeance would have probably covered it up pretty well. Looking really, really rough for MTech here. I think it's pretty much writing on the wall, just playing through the motions here, making sure everything goes well for Alexander. But this Castigate just completely wrapping it up, I think. And yeah, MTech hits the surrender button. 3-1 finish in favor of Trundle's Trolls. they move on to the final, and yeah, just not being able to close it out. MTech with the reverse sweep just was not possible. Alexander showing up with his hard counters, and it paid off. It paid off this time. Didn't pay off for Jinden earlier with his hard counters into Methanical, but now Alexander managing to do it. Perhaps that was because the decks that he chose to counter with were like more consistent options. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you can say a lot about the lineups and which way it went. I think the lineups were pretty even, but I think at the end of the day, the Trundles Trolls they played some very clean Legends of Runeterra. I was pretty impressed with both Methanical and Alexander's play. I think they were just playing good Runeterra. And yeah, there were some moments their decks failed them a little bit because they weren't the highest power level, but they kind of tried to fill out all the different areas of the meta triangle like we talked about, and both teams kind of did that, but I think one team played better Runeterra and they were just rewarded for it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it. I think Trundles Trolls really deserve this win. I think they played pretty well, and I think they also had slightly more favorite sets in general as well because of how the player queue order went. Arax, very happy captain right now. He picked 3 of the players like he wanted the most into his team, and then in the final, just one win away from actually closing out the entire league and taking the big W.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you said, Arax just very happy right now. It took the night off, just said, you know what, boys, I know you got it. Like, it's not even a thing. I'm going to just chill out, get me into next week. I'm going to come in next week. We're going to hold things down. And, I think, like you said, he's very happy with the team he chose. I think, like, especially when you go in, you pick 3 people, you and the guy you first picked didn't even play, and you win your semifinals match super comfortably. Like, how good are you feeling going into, like, the final match at this point?
Yeah, remember in the draft show, whenever we would get to him, he would be emoting. Now we understand why.
Yeah, my bro was emoting. Like, he knew something that we did not.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I'm excited to see what this team does. I'm not surprised to see them do so well. So, I'm looking forward to how the finals go. And they'll be going up against whoever wins between Azir's Ascended and Swain's Flock, which we will be covering tomorrow as well in a broadcast. So, stay tuned for that. I'm not sure if any of the Trundles Trolls players are available for an interview, but we are gonna see if we can try to pick it up. If we can't, we'll let you guys know. But for now, we'll go to a quick break, and we might be back with an interview, and we might not be. Not sure. Wait, are we going to a break anymore? I'm not sure. All right, we have an interview. So we have actually the hardest worker from the Trundles Troll team.
So true.
Puts in so much work today, man. Drissoth, congratulations. How hard did you fight today to get this win?
I mean, I was in a voice channel from like 6:55 p.m. until now, which is like 9:49 p.m. So like really I did the most out of my entire team.
How was the voice chat?
It was pretty good. It was good vibes. We did, obviously the stream's on a delay, and so we like have people pop in. There was a really terrifying period of time where Eric's, the team manager, would like keep showing back up, and we're also expecting one of our teammates to be done. We're like, is it Bath? Did he lose? And it's just Eric's popping back in, but it was a good time. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. So, do you mind sharing a little bit about your guys' thought process going into the week? It seems like you guys tried to bring a fair spread of different decks, but you also all avoided Jan and Nyla.
Yeah, the Jan and Nyla thing was very intentional. We were expecting decks from our opponents, stuff like Formidables. Donut didn't actually play this week, but Donut was the main reason. It was like, oh, we think their team is just going to have like 2 copies of Formidables. We think they're going to try and really go after Jan and Nyla. And I don't know, I kind of generally in the meta, I had this opinion of like, you can definitely beat Jan and Nyla. You can't really beat Janna. And if people just play Janna Teemo instead, all of a sudden these like big mid-rangey decks are just getting CS'd with a bunch of elusives and dying on the spot. And so like, Janna's really dumb. We can just play Janna in a different dumb deck if you're going to go hunting for Janna Nyla.
Yeah, it's good to hear that like you guys thought that through and identified the weakness. And like I definitely agree that like Janna is very difficult to beat, but when you are only focusing on one Janna deck, it becomes a lot easier. Tell me a little bit about the team. Are you happy with the team you have? I mean, you guys are in the finals, so you probably are. But how are the vibes? How are the vibes?
The vibes are good. I like my teammates. They go well. We probably are a little bit too stats driven. So I'm not the most stats driven person on a team, which is an abnormal place for me to be. But good time. I enjoy it.
Yeah, sounds very nice. Sounds very nice. Let's see. I had one question for you specifically. We didn't see you play, but I really wanted to know about the Jinx Cannon deck in your lineup. Like, what was the thought process behind Jinx Cannon?
We were basically looking for a third deck that I could play, and a lot of the other options were dubious. There's a point in time that I was just looking at Jaxorn, which is fine. Jinx Cannon recently started doing well. It had matchups where we were looking for like into Formidables, into Janna Nyla, into a few other things. And it's a deck, obviously, well, I guess not obviously. I haven't played that much of Jinx Cannon this meta, but 2 metas ago or something, when Wrench gave Impact, I played a crap ton of that deck, and none of the cards changed. I mean, obviously, like, Wrench does something different, but it's not like we're playing, like, Miriam and Divine Whirlwind all of a sudden. It's just the same deck with some balance changes. So, felt like I was comfortable enough on it. Had historical games, if not current games. But...
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We were pretty impressed with Jinx Cannon as well in some of our testing for the Open. We just found, like, the Scouts, Seraphine, Janna Nyla trio was like really scary, but as that kind of shifted away this week, I think it made a lot of sense to pivot to that.
Yeah, I don't know if the deck is like clearly busted. I think the only thing in this meta that I just like look at and I'm like, oh, that's pretty messed up is the Janna package, but it's definitely playable. It's completely fine. So maybe we take Jinx Cannon and we get the Janna package into it, and you, like, I don't know, Hearts Made Whole into the bird. That sounds cute.
Yeah, now we're cooking. Get
Let
some
him
3 ones in there too. Oh yeah, now we're cooking.
That's the deck for next week, man. That's the deck for next week.
Maybe. Well, we get to pick the format, right? We get to pick Eternal or Standard?
Yeah, you get to agree with the team that wins tomorrow, whether you guys want to play Eternal or Standard, yeah. Do you have a preference?
I think it depends on the patch, to be completely honest with you.
Fair enough.
That's fair.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well, I am completely out of questions. Card Gamer, do you have anything you want to ask?
Yeah, I got one last question for you.
Sure.
Who do you think you're going to be playing next week? And then do you have any preemptive trash talk if you want to throw that out there?
Oh, that's a good question, man.
I think we're going to be playing Azir's Ascended, but I think it will be 5 games. Try to make sure I was doing math right. I don't know. Hi Guy, I'd like to know why you on Twitter took Wiggly Burblefish, the greatest art of all time, and decided to put weird sunglasses from, I think, Go Hard on it. So if you could answer that question at the earliest convenience, I'll take certified mail. Let me know.
All right,
It's really messed up for you to combine bad cards with our good cards like Wiggly Burblefish. What you doing, bro?
But sometimes the Burblefish finds the Go Hard, you know? It's unavoidable.
It does occasionally happen.
You would know, you played that deck a lot.
I did.
But yeah, I guess that's it for now. Since you worked really hard today, Drislav, do you have any shout-outs you want to make before you leave?
I mean, Math definitely deserves a shout-out. Math, the linchpin of the matchup for us was Jinden, where I was like fine into Jinden. The other two, Alex and Math, were not good into Jinden. And so we thought they weren't going to lead Jinden. So we let off with Matt. And we expected Matt to win. I would go in to try and beat Jinden, and then maybe I win, maybe I lose. We eventually send in Alexander for cleanup, and Matt just beat Jinden anyway. So Matt definitely is as much fun as it is to joke about how hard I worked and how much I carried this team. Matt definitely was the one who carried.
Yeah, I think we're
that's
all really impressed with him tonight.
Yeah, for sure. Matt definitely deserves it. And yeah, looking at these lineups, I was really worried about Jinden, but you guys pulled through. So congratulations again on making it to the final. We'll be seeing you guys next week, and thank you for joining for the interview, Dressel. It was a pleasure. With that being said, we will be back tomorrow actually with the next semifinal. It's going to be a season ended against Swain's Flock, so stay tuned for that. Make sure you don't forget to tune in. Be same time as today. From me and Card Gamer, it was a pleasure today. We'll be sending you guys off, and yeah, have a great night.
Take care, everyone.
kiss, sweet like poison. You know you make me reckless. I'll